Good everything, Nubians and others. We are 177 in class with Carr. I don't know what's going to happen next week because Dr. Carr is going to be in Kemet. Hi, good morning, sir. Hello.
Good, everything, good, everything. Yeah, well, hopefully we'll go at some point. We might have to pre-record something over there, or hopefully we can stream live. Depends. It's a 7 hour time difference.
Okay.
And any of you all know about VPNs or any of that business, let us know because I've been doing my research and talking to folk. We should be okay, but we'll see. We'll just say less at this point and see what
Yeah.
happens.
So what is it like 3 o'clock in the afternoon there now? My
Mhm.
math is bad, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and the heat is oppressive, but it's dry heat. It's not like the heat here.
Okay.
The only question will be whether we will be out. Like
Okay.
we'll start in Cairo. So the things that everybody thinks of when we think of Egypt or Kemet, the pyramids, the tomb, will be there early, and then we go south. And Luxor and Aswan. Luxor is often called the largest outdoor museum in the world.
Wow.
Europeans always got to label something. And I guess it's a tourist thing, but it's where many of the temples are, and that's where the Valley of the Kings and Queens are. So you think of Tutankhamun, King Tut, so to speak, Hatshepsut, all that, and then Aswan, of course, is near the Sudan border. We'll be going a little bit closer to Sudan. We'll go to Abu Simbel, where Ramesses II and Nefertari's temples are. But Aswan is where the Nubians are. So the Nubians with the K will meet the Nubians with the N. And if everybody keeps their mouth shut, nobody will be able to tell the difference that they are black people. And so we'll be down there. So hopefully we'll be able to share that in real time with the folks. So we'll see.
When was the first time you went to Kemet and what was your experience and why?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. It was 1996, the summer of 96. We went with the myself, at the Beatty, at the Watkins. This is before we got our PhDs. We were part of the group, the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, ASCAC. We went for our conference. We had the conference in Ghana, and then we went to Egypt, to Kemet, and of course that's back when so many of the people who we are now experiencing ancestrally through the work we're doing here were still around physically. Jacob Carruthers, Asa Hilliard, and Zingarata Bisha Heru, you name it. And in fact, Mama Adelaide, I want to say Sanford was on that trip.
Wow.
Yeah,
Queen Mother Moore.
Queen Mother, no question, Queen Mother, and so many others. So we went with probably maybe a couple of hundred between Ghana and then Egypt. There was a group that went to Kemet first and then came to the conference in July in Ghana. And then we went to Ghana first. And then when we finished the conference, we went to the Nile Valley. So all of those folk, um, the Thomas family from Los Angeles, I remember them specifically because their two little girls, I had my grammar with me, my Gardner Egyptian grammar. So I was teaching them some in basic meta nature as we were out there. And one is now a neurosurgeon, and the other is a linguist, professor of linguistics, who has spent all kind of time easy. But they were children at that. So I mean, this is how it works.
Well, so were you. You're in your 20s, your late
Yeah,
20s,
yeah.
go. And I was just thinking about, I just had this thing, this epiphany, like to mature into adulthood
Mm-hmm.
is a wonderful thing, and you look back at your 20-something-year-old self and you realize how much you didn't know and how you had, like I went to Paris at 16.
What?
Yeah, it was a school trip, so we went to Spain, went to Madrid, and but I'm like, I ain't appreciate it. Dr. Carr, I ain't appreciate nothing. I was like 16. It shouldn't be wasted on young people who can't even, assess value, just like treated like any other place. But I was wondering if 20-something-year-old Dr. Carr or pre-Dr. Carr
Mm.
going then, was this your first time on the continent? And
Oh,
was
absolutely.
there some sort of like awakening or you just took it like as a student with your notepad and pen and
Oh no, no, it was absolutely. I had made a vow that I was not going to touch any ocean until I touched it from the right side because um
wow.
and so when we got to
Wait, pause. So you had never been to a beach before you went to Africa?
let me think. Yeah, I don't recall because I couldn't swim. But that wasn't even the point. For me, I'm thinking specifically about the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, I didn't buy in then, and I don't buy in now into this myth of American exceptionalism or the concept of an American nation. This is a criminal enterprise. And so if I was going to touch the Atlantic Ocean, it was going to be from the side I got taken from, not the side I got taken to. This is
wait, hold on, Dr. Carr. What 20-something-year-old? And I'm so that says something like profound about you, right? Because like, who's thinking, I'm not touching this water? I touch it from the place that I got taken.
That was 96, so I was 31 by then. Remember, I had growing up in Tennessee, I hadn't been to the Atlantic, and then going to law school in Ohio, I hadn't had any occasion. I was in New York for sure, and I think New York probably the first time I went to anywhere near a beach, because I went all over the region. And
I'm flat. I grew up in Jersey, so
yeah. Well, yeah, you're right.
My dad, I think I was like 4. We went to Cheesequake Park, and I remember him swimming in the ocean, with a bunch of guys. They were racing or something, and I remember going, "Wow, my daddy could swim." It's like it was crazy watching him, in the water. Like the beach is something we do in Jersey. It's like that there are whole swaths of Americans that don't go to the beach, and it's summertime and hot as hell right now, or everywhere. It's like it's an epiphany for me right now, because we live in our own little silos, and we think everybody's experience is our experience, which is why it's great to be in community with folk from different places, different walks, and bang up against them so that we can see things differently. That is wild. But continue. I'm just like,
no, it's true. And I would probably, wouldn't you think maybe the vast majority of folks who live in the United States will be closer to the experience we had than the one y'all had?
Yeah, I could have. I was like, everybody goes to the beach, right?
No, I think that's probably I have to think about it. Maybe one of the origins of water rides at amusement parks. People don't have, unless you're near a lake, or obviously there are a lot of lake bodies of water, but the ocean, and certainly for people like in Chicago, they think Lake Michigan is the ocean, which is so big. Until they go to the ocean, right? So no. It's not a long story. We went the day we went to Elmina, the mine, one of the dungeons, and there on the ocean. That's the day I went out in the ocean. And say, okay, now my feet can touch this water. Why? Because we got taken. If not from here, if not from Gore, if not from place in Angola or somewhere, it doesn't really matter where. This the side of the water we came from. And that wasn't something I had in mind as a child. That was a virtue of having gone to a HBCU with solid historians and memory keepers, Lois McDougall and so many others. Baba Youssef and his bookstore, Cable Line Books. That was, the African Center for Study and Worship in Columbus, Ohio, Mariba Kelsey. By then, it was a wrap. I wasn't going nowhere near the Atlantic Ocean. A very big part of this is memory. Like what we're talking about in Florida, this whole question, there's a fundamental lack of articulation of what we mean when we use language that stems from the assumptions we make about each other. So when people say personal benefit, for example, people are reading that lens. They're reading that through a cultural lens that hadn't been articulated. When I think personal benefit, I think liberation. Oh yeah, I'm gonna use this skill to cut your throat. Your whole head is coming off. And not just for me, but for everybody who got enslaved here. So I don't have no problem with that language, but I understand we don't have a shared understanding. So I'm not gonna stand in the Atlantic Ocean on the wrong side. Why? This is indigenous people land over here. Every time we get in this water, in my mind, it's reinforcing something. It may not be conscious, but the whole idea, if I'm, and so it was an important ritual. Yeah. So that was something. And then of course we spent, in fact, there's one other memory that jumps out at me, and this shout out to the Flag family in LA, who I saw when I was out there a couple of weeks ago. Their son, Christian, was Nandi on that trip. Nandi was their baby girl. Both of them now got children. And it's crazy, but there were a bunch of young people from Crenshaw High School who went with us. And myself, Mario, Valethia, Troy Allen, who's now ancestor, we were responsible for, while the conference was going on, and we participated in the bigger conference. In fact, John Clark was at that time couldn't make the trip. He was too ill to come. So he gave Anderson Thompson the paper he was going to read, and Thompson with instructions to give it to me. So I read John Henry Clark's paper in the well of the Ghanaian Senate at the ASCAT conference. In fact, there's a video of it floating around somewhere out there in social media. I was about 110 pounds at the time, which is hilarious to me. But yeah, so John Clark, the last talk that he gave while he was alive in Africa, he didn't give it, I did for him. But at any rate, we then had a 2-day conference with the teenagers from Crenshaw High School. There were about maybe 15, 20 of them, and 15 or 20 students from Accra and other places in Ghana. They're in the Ghanaian Senate. We had taken over part of the Ghanaian Senate for the conference. So we had this big conference room, and we started the conversation at the opening of the conference. So all the students from Crenshaw stood up, and they had on their African clothes. They were so happy. They had gotten stuff before they left the United States. And then all the Ghanaian students stood up. These young women and men had on suits and ties and dresses. And as they said, I said, now everybody stop. This is at the beginning of the conversation. Do y'all see how y'all got dressed? That is very African. What we mean? Forget the dress. Professor Hunter, why did they show up in what they considered to be their best clothes?
Because they wanted to show respect and deference to the people that they were greeting and meeting.
Exactly. So all you people saying, "Oh, you're in a hotel, yeah, that cloth ain't even for me." Hey, shh. Culture is protocol, as Angie Porter teaches us. Culture is that is exactly right. It was very African. We want to show our affection for you, our respect for you. And so, but they did it in the inverse. So all these people arguing about African clothes and African names. No. Being African is more than a name, more than some cloth, it's the product, it's the culture. Personal benefit. Yeah, not personal benefit isn't about individuals. It's about individuals in community with others. That's why you can't read the curriculum right unless you got a different framework. So that's exactly right. And then this is the last part of that. So we had 2 days of incredible conversation. There was a moment where we were talking about value and what value meant. And I pulled out a dollar bill. And I said, now this dollar over here in Ghana, I think the CD at that time was maybe 7 CD to $1. And I said, this is very valuable. So I took it and I ripped it. You could hear the Ghanaian kids like, oh, and I ripped it in little pieces. And I said, now this, and I picked up a CD note, a CD coin, 5-cent CD. That's not even water money, as the kids said. And you can't even do nothing with a 5, but it has a calorie on the side. I said, you see this piece right here? I'm going to take this back to Nashville and give it to my mother. You know what she's going to do? Every time somebody come to her house in Nashville, she's going to show them some money from Africa with a cowrie shell on it. In terms of value, that piece of paper I tore up with George Washington's face on it, that is what drives the way we perceive value. But this is much more valuable to her. After that moment, we took a break. This child came up to me, about 16-year-old, put another one of the coins in my hand and said, I know you're going to take that one back, but take this one back and tell your mother I gave her this. Value. This is what I'm talking. So when people talk, oh, y'all are so narrow. Hey, you don't know nothing about it because your master's named George Washington. You're making brown-faced minstrel shows about Hamilton. Until you have conversations with other African people, particularly at that age, you can't understand. And then on the last day of the conversation we were having with them, this is like day 3, the primary chiefs and queen mothers of the region came to observe the conversation. Maybe about 5 men, 5 women. They had on their full dress. When they came in, all of the young people stood up. The Ghanaian kids about a split second earlier, but the other kids, they stood. Who brought them in? Leonard Jeffries and Rosalind Jeffries, because they members of ASCAT came. I tell that, and then we talked with them, and basically we listened with them. But I tell that story because a generation before, not even a generation, 1987, when 1,000 Black folk went to the Nile Valley with ASCAT. This is the biggest trip. It kind of relaunched the study tours, like one we're about to go on. We're in that genealogy. There were a couple of young boys who went with their uncle and auntie, Leonard and Rosalind Jeffries, to the Nile Valley as children. One of them is a professor at Ohio State University, my friend Hassan Kwame Jeffries. And the other is the minority leader of the United States House of Representatives. That would be Hakeem Jeffries. So, I mean, when people think about the Nile, we have to rethink the way we think. We've been doing this a long time. So anyway,
and I bring it up because, the Jewish children, they have a fund to make sure that every Jewish child anywhere in the world can go back to Israel.
That's right.
And experience that. and the value of that, with the hashtag never forget, with the constant remembrance of everything from Passover to all of the other holidays in between, Yom Kippur to of course, Holocaust remembrance, and all of that reinforces a certain narrative that gives people pride and also a sense of purpose.
That's right.
And what you're experiencing, and the couple of hundred people that are going with you, those who've never touched foot, and the way you framed it in terms of, I'm going to put my foot in the ocean of whence we came,
Yes,
completely, changes everything, even how I'm now going to perceive the beach. Do you know what I'm saying? So I appreciate that perspective, but I feel like we should have a fund somewhere where there's every child, inner city, whatever they call that, should have the summer to go to Africa. They should absolutely. And you're muted. I'm not sure why.
I got
Okay.
you.
Okay. All right.
No. You're absolutely right. And in fact, we're getting there. We're getting there. I mean, this is, there are a lot of people who have done that over the years, many decades. A number of the African-centered schools take young people to the continent from the United States. Aisha Shule and Du Bois Academy from Detroit, Nation House here in the DC area, Quilombo out down there in Atlanta. I mean, I could go on and on and on. The African Center School's been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking, like, I watched an episode of Swagger on Apple TV, and
Yeah,
it had John Carlos in a youth facility, right, for reform school or whatever they call it, prison facility for young people.
how about that?
And the basketball, but Reggie Rock by the Wood, his whole purpose was to show the humanity of these children that we look at as criminals, right?
Yes,
And so he did it, and it was beautifully done. And having John Carlos there as the coach and as himself, and talk about civil rights and things like that, I was thinking, how beautiful would it be to have those children who have been caught up in the system, because the system, they don't see them as individuals. And as one said, I was 14, as a 14-year-old, do you not give 14-year-old grace? I know other children get grace for killing folk while having affluenza. Somehow there's grace for a rapist from Stanford. Somehow there's grace because they have a future. Our children have a future, and we must demand that instead of incarcerating them, maybe this can be the trade-off. Spend a month in Africa, spend a month on the continent.
absolutely.
And there should be a program receiving them and take them through the paces. But those are the things that I was thinking about.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. In fact, it's very important, as you say. And I'm glad you brought up the Israel example. I see some folk in the chat talking about, Israel is occupied Palestine. It's so funny. I was having a conversation yesterday in the bookstore with I went out to get stuff for Kemet, and then my feet ended up in the bookstore. That's just, I just can't stay away from the bookstore. But anyway, but they had just received a huge collection from someone who had spent a lifetime collecting materials on the British occupation of Palestine, the creation of Israel. So I'm looking at these rare books and having this conversation with them, and talking about that in the context of what's going on right now in Israel, as we see, the Netanyahu administration partnership with the extreme nationalists and the kind of religious nationalists in Israel to curb the power of their judiciary. And not 100, not 1,000, not 10,000, not 100,000, but millions of Israelis expressing outrage, hundreds of thousands in the streets, and they still passed the policy. Anytime your military starts saying we don't want to participate, and this is from a military who has been very brutal in its occupation, you're talking now about something where they are going through a real challenge in Israel. And at the same time, the Jewish diaspora, for lack of a better term, which kind of forced the issue by aligning its interests, its material geographical interests with the colonial and imperial interests of old Europe, England, particularly France, and the United States emerging after World War II, were able to carve out that piece of Palestine and name it Israel. The diaspora is also split because they realize, people are human. We all breathe the same air. We all suffer the same illnesses. We all have the same joys and pains. And when you start dealing with brutality, nothing good can come of that. And so Israel is at a crisis point now, and it isn't just in the country, it's global. And you think about that in terms of us as African people, our perpetual ongoing trauma of separation has created an idea of the home continent that is often romanticized. That's part of the challenge as well. However, it is also a point of departure for a deepening understanding if we can manage it. And when people make the comparison between the continent of Africa and the country of Israel, I think it is a very legitimate comparison to make when you start talking about how do you create a we, because people don't challenge it in the way that Africans are challenged. They say, well, y'all don't have a common religion, y'all don't have a common culture. No, and the one that is called Jewish has its roots in Africa, as we'll be seeing on the walls of the Nile Valley. The question is, where do you begin and what's your objective? What are you trying to do? And so, as you say, if you bring young people to the African continent, realizing that Tanzania is not Ghana and Nigeria is not South Africa and Egypt is not Algeria or Western or Sudan, at the same time, just being on the continent in conversation with other young people and in conversation with other people, what is exactly wrong with that? I'll tell you what it does, and this is where I think it threatens the West and those who have been colonized by the West. It displaces the idea that if you're in the United States and get to study abroad or travel abroad or go somewhere, your first trip should be to Europe. It displaces that fantasy. Like we finished summer school this week, and the young people we had, the STEM students, the Carr STEM students, Bison STEM students, brother Ron Smith and his young charges. These are students who are on full scholarship at Howard. They're studying everything from physics and biology to chemistry, and they're engineer students. And then there's students in the social sciences and humanities in this bridge program. They're studying Africana studies and English and history, all these things. We had them for a month. They left. Today is Saturday. Oh, they leave today. They leave today for Ghana. Now, this program started about 6 or 7 years ago. The first 5 or 6 years, up until this year, they went to Europe. They went to Germany. They went, and we was banging on them all the time. Said, "No, y'all got us in this class, and then y'all gonna go to Europe." Brother Smith finally was able to work it. He said this. He said, "That a car. We're going to Ghana this time." I said, "See, y'all pick going to Ghana, and we going back to Egypt. I'll go with y'all and then come back over." But anyway, they will be landing in Ghana shortly, because they said we got to take. And when I told them, I said, when y'all get there, when y'all go to the dungeon, y'all do a ritual, whatever prayer y'all say, put us in it. And they was like, "Don't worry, we got you." And I said, "Go here, you got to do that. You got to go by Du Bois's house." They might cross paths with Kathy Adams and her colleagues over there from Claflin. People are taking young people to the continent.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with it, as you say.
That's it. It was the best 10-hour flight I've ever taken in my entire life. I'm not.
You gotta tell us about that trip.
No, I'm not a happy flyer. I hate flying, period. Before COVID, and there's all the things and turbulence, and I don't understand how we up in the air, this 1,000-pound thing that makes no sense. I see clouds and we're heavy. I noticed some science behind it. I just don't understand it. But it was a beautiful flight, full of black people, coming and going. All of the flight attendants, everybody was black. The pilots were black. I even took a flight inside Africa to Kumasi. The quickest. It was like the best flight ever. And it was like, people can drive. You know how people can drive? Well, there's an equivalent of that in the air, and it was just magical. And eating at the ocean side, eating fresh fish, being in community with the nicest people I've ever met. Beautiful human beings, nice. Ghanaians are nice, not like us.
Isn't that something?
We not nice. We're not nice here.
They're
nice.
But you got to be nice.
Collectively, we ain't really that nice, except for some of you Southern people. But yeah, no, it was beautiful. It was very beautiful. It was beautiful. And it was an experience that I'm grateful. And I didn't want to have it like in a hokey way, so I didn't stay at a hotel. I stayed at a house and hung out with people, and stayed with their family members. And I wanted to have a real experience with human beings, and not a social media event. So I didn't even really post until I got back.
But we're not nice, Professor Hunter, and you did that. you know, the ugly American, we done picked up some terrible habits. The American Negro, the first one to get off plane, talking about, can we get to the hotel where the air conditioner at? I mean, so you didn't do that. So
Nah,
clearly you demonstrated.
you know, I was raised right by Dr. Carr. No, I'm just playing. I was raised right too.
No, right.
Margie and Donald. But yeah, you know, most of the, and I'm not talking about Nubians. So, you know, if I ain't talking about you, don't, you know, let it go.
Right.
But you know, you got cousins that don't know how to act.
Oh yeah, we do.
So,
Sure,
you know, that's all I'm talking about them, not you. But yeah, no, I was happy that I went what I went, but I wish I had gone earlier because I think it would have shaped me in a completely different way. And I'm going back, and I want to go to Senegal, and I want to go to Tanzania, and I definitely am doing Kemet at some point.
Yes.
But I think the more we travel, the more we see how small the world is, and how what we have here, while we should definitely appreciate it, particularly women, we should definitely appreciate what we have that is going away too, which is why we should fight even more for these rights. But it also tells you that, you know, around the globe, we're all really just human beings having an experience. And that we should just see each other as people. But I'm so excited about what you guys are going to be doing because I want to hear everything.
What we're doing. We're doing. And we've been back many times since then. We were back. I hadn't gone since 96. The next time we went was 2007. We had our ASCAC conference there again in Aswan. This is where in 1987, 1,000 Africans from around the world, mostly from the United States, convened and kind of or extend. I won't say anything. Let me get away from the language of because in that sense, we're going to talk about we in a minute in terms of him and Masu, but we came back for our conference, and that was the last time that Asa Hilliard in his human form, physical form, spoke to and with us. He presented. The next day, he kind of took ill, and he made transition a couple of days later in Cairo. And if Baba J is here this morning, today with us, Baba Jeremiah Wright, Asa was splitting time between the Trinity United Church of Christ. Baba J had gotten him to kind of lecture with them and guide them through some of the places they were going, because they were in the Nile Valley at the same time. This is the other thing. These journeys to the Nile Valley are not outliers for people of African descent. People are going all the time. We'll probably, if past is prelude, we'll probably run into Tony Browder. Tony has been back and forth a couple of times. One time, his daughter Atlantis, back in December last year, Atlantis led the trip. They've been working now for over a decade on an active excavation site with a Russian Egyptologist, Professor Pistakova. They are excavating and exploring the tomb mortuary complex and related sites of a 20 New Kingdom official named Karkamun. In fact, when we went in 2000, and I guess that was 2008, the following year after Baba Asa made transition, we toured the site. Tony was there, we were there. We just missed each other. I think we may have even gone a couple of days before Tony. And we took the students that we had. I'll tell you about that in a second. But at any rate, so we'll probably run into Tony. The last time we were there in 2019, we ran into Tony. My man T. Owens Moore and them, we ran into them in Cairo. They were headed back. The Dessert Club, we ran into them in JFK. We were all leaving on the same flight. Huge group of people. They've been taking people to Kemet for 30 some years consistently. Clinton Crawford, I ran into Clinton Crawford at the John Henry Clark room unveiling when I was up at Hunter, and I asked Clinton about the climate in Kemet, given the fact that, you know, this whole banter about Kevin Hart canceling a concert. I see Travis Scott was supposed to do one in front of the pyramids. I'm kind of glad that he put a hold on that for technical issues, whatever. I don't really care. I mean, spectacle is not what we're going for. He'll get there and that'll be great. And just I'm glad it ain't coinciding with us gonna be there. But at any rate, the whole Cleopatra mess and all this stuff. And Clinton was like, nah, don't even worry about that, and we're not, we wouldn't go otherwise. But Clinton Crawford, we might run into Clinton. I know he's going, Dr. Crawford, who's at the Bureau of Manhattan Community College, or had been for many years. Who else might we run into? Brother Jabari and them. They're on the East Coast. He and his wife, we usually run, and they usually take a big group. As I said, last time we were there, we were coming out of the Pyramid of Giza, and who pulled up? But Malefi Asante with his group. We ran him a couple of times. Got a chance to catch up with Dr. Asante. Of course, we all went to Temple University, so Asante was there. And that's just people I'm thinking of off the top of my head that we see. You'll probably run into a lot of them. Some people started going back last year and even the year before, even during COVID. We didn't do that. This will be our first time back since 2019. But to put a bow on the rhythms of how we've been traveling, and it's interesting, Prof, that you mentioned this whole question of, how's this thing staying up in the air? It's very interesting how people react to flight, the cultural dimension. Going there, every time I've been to the continent of Africa, there hasn't been a time I've landed where upon landing, and we're talking about people going home, people taking flights between countries. I remember the first and only time I've been to Nigeria, and I got to get back because that was only a quick burst. Same thing with Ethiopia. I landed in Addis in Ethiopia, landed in Kano, northern Nigeria. And them Negroes burst into applause. It's like, I mean, it's respect for the pilot. It's also respect for the fact I've been in the air and now I'm on the ground. It's a cultural thing. Christian, Muslim, however you, I mean, I think it's an acknowledgement that this is not natural.
That's
and, right. And did they clap when they landed, Rob?
Hell yeah. And I was praying, praying and I meant to say amen, Ra.
Amen, Ra, or amen, don't matter. That's the point. Everybody clapping. We it's not denominational.
I just wanted to also public service announcement. People who are going, please drink water. Please drink a lot of water. Please do not dehydrate and pass out. Do not make this trip miserable for the rest of the people because you didn't drink water and you passed out. And dehydration is horrible and it will ruin the trip for yourself and everyone. So please do not hydrate. That's all. I just wanted to say that. No, and we can hydrate here too. Those of you in Arizona, please hydrate.
Please. Every one of the buses we have has they keep them stocked with water. You gotta hydrate. We're not gonna let anybody not hydrate. Absolutely. And we have, the folk we're going with, in fact, Consolidated is the tour company we go with, and that is because I'll never forget being in Detroit in 1995. I had just been appointed to the board of ASCAC, and I was the youngest member of the board. I'm sitting there next to Jacob Carruthers, and the Consolidated was making their pitch because we knew we were going to go to Ghana and Egypt the following year, and a year in advance. Shout out, by the way, to my frat brothers, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, not going to Florida. But most organizations go at least a year, some 2 or 3 years out in terms of where they're going to go for the following year if they're big enough. And ASCAC, we decided we were going. And when they made the presentation, Moses Hananiah, who was now an ancestor, very close with Asa Hilliard, really Passy Joe Hilliard, because Asa Hilliard is kind of like the bridge for that whole arc of African-centered movement back and forth to the continent, certainly the Nile Valley. Asa had been going for years. Prior to him, the kind of person who kind of paved the way in many ways, although certainly not the first. We don't get into this first thing, this ordinal classification. Again, thinking of Jacob Carruthers, Science and Oppression, and the dangers of ordinal classification, the first this, the first that. But in terms of kind of making the way, we can go back to the 1920s, frankly, and Elaine Locke, who Black people raised money, among others who raised money, but Black people at the center of it, to send Elaine Locke as Negro America's representative when they opened the tomb of Tutankhamun, which is very interesting. There's a whole story behind that. But at any rate, so we've been going to the Nile Valley really since the 19th century. Edward Wilmot Blyden. Ooh, Christianity, Islam, and the Negro race. Stop playing. Oh my God. Yes, Edward Blyden, who no, that's the Negro in film. I don't know who, and books have stories, and I actually put this on Twitter yesterday because I was sitting leafing through these copies of the Negro yearbook that I was able to lay my hands on. And but yeah, anyway, I thought about Christianity, Islam, and the Negro race. This is Edward Blyden from 1887. This is the reprint actually from Edinburgh University Press. This is the reprint from 1967. I want to apologize to the bookseller who sold me this book for $20 yesterday, but you know, it's got a good home. And the whole point is that I'm like, I mean, I have copies of Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race. Paul Coates, Black Classic Press, bought it back into print. And I've actually got the American version of this as well. Hollis Lynch wrote the introduction. This is the one with Christopher Fife's introduction. But I'm just saying that to say, in the context of book collecting, and Prof, you know, you've been saying that we need to do this, and I just got word from Mr. Blockson's daughter, Noelle, through his niece, who was my former student, Alex Mitchell, who's out at the California African American Museum, one of my children. She said Uncle Charlie's memorial will be in September in Philly. So as they get more details and give them to me, I'll make sure everybody knows, those of you who want to attend. But as Mr. Blockson would always say, and all book collectors know, you know, when you acquire a book that belonged to somebody else, there is a story. There are stories behind the provenance of that book. And often, you know, like yesterday when I was, you know, in one of my haunts having conversation with the booksellers, I want to know, where did y'all get this? Because I came upon a little corner at the bottom shelf, tucked away, of about 4 or 5 books that shouldn't have been there. Now I want to know, whose collection did you acquire, or who brought these in here? Because I want to know how I'm standing here leafing through a copy of Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race, who written by Edward Blyden, who having in an art, wow, the ancestors are incredible. He wrote an article called Israel and Palestine, no, an Africa and Palestine. Man, Jake Perez needs to be here, Anson Thompson, to put this in my ear. But in that essay, he talks about ancient Egypt, and he talks about a Liberian poet named Hilary Teague. Y'all forgive me for closing my eyes because I got to look at it. And Teague, upon entering the chamber of the Great Pyramid at Giza, Khufu, which we will be standing in, will have already toured by this time next week. He said, I went in there, I looked around, and then I said to myself, I wish that every African in the world could be standing where I am standing now. Teague, a Liberian, across the continent in Egypt, in the pyramid, in the 19th century. Edward Blyden in the 1880s, writing about this Liberian poet who had been there before him, said, and then he said, great feelings washed over me. This is what Blyden says. Great period. Oh, by the way, Edward Wilmot Blyden from the Danish West Indies, so to speak, the so-called Virgin Islands, St. Croix. So all these people saying Africans ain't got no connection to African Americans, everyone should probably just lower the volume and go back to study. Blyden, who says that, I know it's not us. I'm just saying some of our people who have been driven wild by blackface, white nationalism, this American nativism. And yes, I'm being very critical because I think it's time to be serious now. It's time to be serious. We can't, you know, let's be generous with each other. Let's be kind with each other. Let's understand the traumas. Let's work together. But at some point, we got to draw a line because there's a lot of line drawing going on right now. And we're on the wrong side of too many of them. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But Blyden says, I'm standing in the chamber, and all I could think of was the Liberian poet Hilary Teague. By the way, the reason Ed Blyden would think of Edward Wilmot Blyden, Reverend Edward Wilmot Blyden, would think of a Liberian poet is because Edward Wilmot Blyden spent a great deal of his adult life in Liberia. helped set up the University of Liberia. This is a man from the Caribbean who did this. He's standing in the pyramidal hall. He says, and he writes a verse from Hilary Teague's poem where he says, from Pyramidal Hall, from Thebes, which is one of the cities in Luxor, temple complex that we'll be going to. Waset is its name in Meta Nature, as those of you taking that Beatty's course or studying Meta Nature on your own know. From Pyramidal Hall, from Thebes, they loudly call, retake your fame. Oh, man. He said, I'm standing here looking at this. I'm in this space that these Africans created, and make no mistake, they were Africans. He says, at that moment, and anybody who has traveled and seen things and been in things and wished that you could have had your mama there with you or your family there with you, personal benefit. Let's dance, DeSantis. We're going to talk personal benefit today, except our personal benefit is we, not individuals. This ain't no funky capitalist individual up from slavery striving type BS. You know, you can take that curriculum. We're going to rewrite your whole funky curriculum. In fact, we don't even want your curriculum. You do what you do. We're going to do what we do. And then we're going to dance. We're going to see who feet come off. Anyway, personal benefit, collective benefit. Biden standing in the chamber says, I'm here by myself, personal benefit. But I wish every African in the world could be here. Personal benefit. It's a different definition. I wish that we was in here. And all I can think of is my friend Hilary T. And he said, from Pyramidal Hall, from Thebes, they loudly call, retake your fame. He says, if my voice could have reached every African in the world, I would have said at that moment, retake your fame. In other words, you stop listening to these people. This building's still here. We're going to go to see it again. It's still there. Oldest, boldest, biggest, first scientists put it together. Ain't a speck of mortar between them big granite blocks and limestone. Stacked millions of stones, all of them taller than a person, built, stacked up on top of each other in a perfect, and it's a ruin. If you want to have a glimpse of what it might have looked like before they took all the limestone off to build other buildings and took the metal off the top, the gold and the silver at the top, you might want to check out one of the many album covers of Maurice White and Earth, Wind, and Fire, because that is what they were doing. That's Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism ain't imagining something in the future without rooting it. It's taking the past and projecting it in the present forward to the future, as we talked about at BlurredCon. So if you want to know what it really looked like, when you can see that metal gleaming from miles away, then you got to almost go look at the album covers of Earth, Wind, and Fire. That's what they were doing. But in that ruin, so to speak, that's how Blyden felt. So yeah, the roots of going to Kemet go back to the 19th century in many ways for Africans who were taken. Now, two other examples, of course, come immediately to mind. Louis Armstrong and Louise Armstrong. Armstrong so moved by being there at the Hor-Em Akhet, the Horus of the Horizon, known colloquially as the Great Sphinx of Giza, and being in front of the Great Pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, Old Kingdom builders, pioneered by Sneferu. We'll be going to those. Sneferu in the Old Kingdom of Kemet. We're talking roughly around 2700, 2800 BC. In other words, almost 5,000 years ago. No, there is no George Washington. Hell, there ain't no King of England or Queen of England. No, there's no Spain. Portugal ain't even a metaphor. No, there's no Catholic Church. Now you got to wait on us for that because Christianity came out of Africa, right? So, I mean, there's nothing there. There's no Greeks to talk about or Romans. All that is in the future when these pyramids went up. So anyway, thinking about Louis and Louise Armstrong there, and they so moved, Armstrong pulls out his horn, starts playing the horn. Long live Maurice White. That's right, Walter. Long live him. And the other example, of course, is Eslan de Good and Paul Robeson. When they went into the great chamber of the Great Pyramid, and they're standing there, Robeson is so moved that he bursts into song and he sings part of the operatic rendering of Isis and Osiris, Osar and Aset. Robeson singing in the chamber of the Great Pyramid to test the acoustics. With that in mind, man, I'm thinking about it now. With that in mind, we were there one time with students from Howard, and we all got up in the chamber. people sweating. We up in there, and there are no hieroglyphs. There are no glyphs. There's no meta nature in the pyramids of Giza. No writing in the pyramids of Snefru, the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, the pyramids at Mayun, Dashur, and Mayun. But what you're going there for is to see the architecture, to be in the space. And so we're in this chamber, which isn't big. And I had told him the story before we went in of Robeson singing Isis and Osiris. I said, I don't know the words to Isis and Osiris. And those are the Greek names anyway for Asar and Aset. But in the spirit of Paul and that's line to Robeson, lift every voice. We all bust out and lift every voice and sing in the chamber of the Great Pyramid. Y'all gonna leave black people alone. Or not. But guess what? We don't care. We don't care. If you want to sit down and worship a 90-some-year-old Queen of England when she passes and shed a tear, that's your business. We'll help your children. Just give us your children. We'll get them in. But, as for me and mine, personal benefit, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to bring the Johnson brothers into the great chamber, the Great Pyramid. So, yeah, people been going a long time. So, like I said, we were there in 96 with ASCAC, there again in 2007 with ASCAC. And, one of the captains of the buses and helping to get the logistics moving for that 1,000 people in 1987 is going with us on this trip. And that, of course, will be the great Kwaku Larry Crow. He and Mama Olabisi will be there. And Larry's going to take point on one of the buses we have. He's bringing a wealth of experience. Those study tours from the Kemetic Institute reach back to the late 60s, early 1970s. So it wasn't just Kemet with them. It's the Sudan, it was Brazil, it was West Africa, Southern Africa. They went a lot of places. Anderson Thompson, one of the great towering figures, took Africans all over the place and made connections all over the place. He was constantly making connections. Like you said, Prof, this isn't just about going and seeing stuff. It's about connecting with people. And it isn't just about connecting with people in hotel lobbies and conferences. Again, this isn't academic travel. This is human to human connecting travel. Very important. Yeah. Don't worry. Oh, by the way, everybody going with us? Make sure not only your eyes, but both hands are on your passports right now. In fact, if you're here right now, just go put your eye on the passport again. Make sure you bring it now when you come here in the DMV area on Tuesday to fly to John Foster Dulles, or if you're flying out of John Fitzgerald Kennedy in New York, make sure LC and Mama Olabisi going to be up in New York, among others. We got the crack team. We got the A team. This was always my dream, Prof, to have an A team. And when we get going next summer, we're going to do the same thing, except it's going to be here. We had an A team. So Larry and Olabisi, Deborah Hurd, who is, of course, a first-rate, brilliant scholar of classical Africa. Her particular area of immediate focus, she does meta-nature, she does the full suite, is the Sudan. She does Nubia. She does Nubia with the N, Nubia. I'm talking about Nubia where the Sudan is right now. That's Deborah Hurd. She's going to be there. Shanice Thompson was going with us. Her grandmother made transition. That's my child. And so she's going to stay back. She'll go next year with a lot of people who are going to go with us, obviously, next year, who didn't go this year. And a lot of people who went this year are going to go again. But Shanice was going to be with us. Angie Porter is going. We're looking forward to her giving at least one talk on her Africana legal studies theory and protocol. She, too, of course, a longtime student of meta-nature. It's going to be very interesting. Mario Beatty, Belethea Watkins, Angela Carter, my TA and research assistant at Howard, is going with us. A lot of people. Baba Kahinde. In fact, we're wrapping next week Philadelphia Freedom Schools. Baba Kahinde is going with us. Kahinde Graham, longtime student, particularly African spiritual traditions. So we got an A team going, and then of course all of us are going to be there together. So be prepared. We'll be having, we've talked about that. We've been having meetings all summer, so I won't get into any detail. For those not going, understand that we are going to share a great deal of this. Yeah, absolutely. Loving y'all sending. We're going, and then of course for those who may never set foot on the continent of Africa. Personal benefit. Let's dance, Ron. You don't even know nothing about it, bruh. The letters you use to spell your name we gave you. Not even thinking about you. Your creation of a bad turn we made. We done migrated up into this damn place in Europe, got caught between the interglacial period, and look what happened. Maybe the lesson should have been maybe stay a little closer to home next time.
Yes.
We're not mad at you, Ron.
Stick to the rivers and lakes that you're used to.
Come on now, TLC. Yes, ma'am. Don't go chasing waterfalls. That's right, please. Yeah, and of course, rivers and lakes. We know about them rivers and lakes. We're gonna stand in it now. We are going to stand at the reflecting pool at Wasset that they call Thebes. This is the model for what you see down on the mall in Washington, D.C., the reflecting pool between the Egyptian temple that they call the Lincoln Memorial. We're going to see where that came from. And the pile of bricks that they call an obelisk. An obelisk is cut out of a single piece of stone. The so-called Washington Monument. It's not an obelisk. It's obelisk-shaped construct, but we're going to see real obelisks where that came from. We're going to see the Tekken, as they are known in Medu Neter, of Hatshepsut. Oh yeah, the queen. I'm sorry, I said the queen. I'm sorry, using the European rendering. The pharaoh, Per-Ua, the great house, not gendered. Per-Ua, Hatshepsut. And so she's the female pharaoh. No, you're the understudied misuser of language. No, she's the Per-Ua. She's the great house, the pharaoh. It's not gendered language. So don't call her a female pharaoh. Understand why. Gay Robbins and all the others who are writing about women in antiquity. Yeah, we're not talking about Cleopatra, old and tired Egypt, 5 minutes before the Greeks and the Romans come in and abusing the Nile Valley. No, we're talking about Hatshepsut. We're talking about the period immediately preceding her in what they call the New Kingdom, the 18th dynasty, the 19th dynasty. We're talking about Amos, his mother, who was a warrior. We're going to see her battle medals when they drove the Amu out of the Nile Valley from invading. This is a woman who had battle medals from victories in battle. We're going to see the medals when we go into the museum in Luxor. Let me stay on point. My point is that yeah, we got some of the veterans from '87 are going, Larry Crow being first and foremost. And so some of the things, some of what we're gonna these are the two things we'll be doing. In addition to grappling with questions of the Nile Valley and what it means, and I'll talk more about that in a second, we're gonna be spending time like people always spend time, to their personal benefit. Come on, Ron, just say, come on, baby. You don't even know nothing about it. We are going to be learning about each other. So as we know, a great deal of travel is getting to know each other. So we spend a lot of time together, a lot of time on the sites, a lot of time in the hotel, a lot of time, in conversation, in the nightly conversations we have around what we have seen and what we're going to see next. And so, we're going to, Larry Crow going to share some of those stories. He's been a lot of places, been so many places in his life and time, and talked to a lot of African people. So, when you are in constant conversation like a guy like Larry Crow, the connections you make are very different. So when you ask him a question about something, he's going to bring in the memories of so many other people, many very prominent, others that you may not know. He may connect them all and then connect them all to when we are standing at the entrance in the Valley of the Kings and Queens to the tomb of Tutankhamun, or standing in the Cairo Museum when we get to see T and Amenhotep III, who are a fascinating power couple of the kingdom. T, of course, the grandmother of Tutankhamun. T and Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III, the father of Akhenaten. So we start talking about monotheism and all that. But Dr. Wright knows that. Reverend Dr. Wright knows that because he's been many times. And in fact, it was when Asa got sick that it was Jeremiah Wright who made the call, Trinity United Church of Christ, who made the call to the then junior senator from Illinois to say, we need Asa airlifted somewhere where they've seen this illness so he can be treated. And that junior senator said, okay, we're ready. We got the plane ready in Cairo. So he flew from where he was with us in Aswan back to Cairo. And Baba J and them had him all set up to leave, but he said, no, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to make transition in the Nile Valley. It's a very moving story of Asa Grant Hilliard III, Baba Amankwatia, who who chose to make transition in the shadow of the pyramids. That junior senator, by the way, that Baba J was in conversation with in Trinity City, we ready to airlift him to place where they got. His name was Barack Obama. Y'all don't know nothing about it, Europeans. Jeremiah Wright is a giant for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is that while you excoriate him from the social structure within the governance structure, you better not even come over here and breathe any type of invective against Jeremiah Wright. You'll find out. F around, find out. But the point is this. Find out. But at any rate, he made transition in the following year. We went back. Not as ASCAC, although some ASCAC folk went, including the president of ASCAC, Nzinga Radabisha Heru. That following year, 2008, I approached the College of Arts and Sciences at Howard University, the director of the honors program, Daniel Williams, the dean of the college, who is now an ancestor to the great James Donaldson. Said, we've been doing study abroad. I've been doing study abroad with the College of Arts and Sciences by then for a couple of years. Our first initiative was 2004. Took students to South Africa. Stephanie Joy Tisdale, who was on that trip as a young person. She's now the regional director for the Freedom Schools, Liberation Academies, and Freedom School sites in Jersey and in Pennsylvania and Philly, particularly. She'll be going with us. She's on this trip. She first went to the Nile Valley as a teenager in Philly with Dessert Club. Again, Black folk been going to Nile Valley for a long time. I'm just filling in the blanks for those who think somehow this is some kind of crazy kind of excursion. No. Let's talk governance now. We're not talking social structure or the poisoning of the African minds. But we went in 2004. Stephanie was an undergrad at Howard. We went to South Africa. That was our first little pilot study abroad, see how it would go. And so they went. I took them, Associate Dean Barbara Griffin, some others. We went, and then let me see. That was 2004. I'm trying to remember. 5, 6 went to South Africa again. 7 went to Kemet. After going to South Africa, I think it's maybe the first time Dr. Williams, Dana Williams went with me. We co-led that. Dana Williams, who's now the dean of the graduate school at Howard University, went. And then 2008, when Baba Asa made transition, we said, well, we got to come back. We did a ritual in the Valley of the Kings and Queens that when he made transition. Theobald Obenga was there. So many others. I won't even, if I start naming, I will miss somebody. Dr. Yas Nantiwa Blake, who was, so important to us in ASCAC. At any rate, so in 2008, we went again, except this time we took about 80 folk, all but about 15 of them Howard students. I got the university to come together and fund these students. And so we went to the Nile Valley. And also on that trip, of course, Nefertari Nunn, Patricia Nefertari Hilliard Nunn, his daughter, his son-in-law Ken Nunn, good brother Ken. They just unveiled a tribute statue to Nefertari. Sister Nefertari, she made transition. Nefertiti, I'm thinking Nefertiti Nunn. She made transition. They unveiled a Sankofa bird at the University of Florida, Gainesville, where she taught for many years and did work on recovering the memory of Africans in the Gainesville area. Personal benefit. Let's dance, Drew, baby. You don't know nothing about it. In your backyard, baby. Let's dance. Let's dance. Up around. Find out. Please. Patricia Nunn was on that trip with us. In fact, she and her husband renewed their vows at that reflecting pool in Wasset, messing around with some funky ass curriculum nobody follows anyway. Anyway, you don't even know nothing about it. Anyway, the point is that, and both of them teaching for many years at the University of Florida. Yeah, that would be the University of Florida, Gainesville. That's in Florida. You really think this curriculum gonna stop us? You don't know nothing about it. You were still rooting around trying to finish your exams at Harvard, baby. We was dancing this dance, rumple suit looking punk. But anyway, the point is that the nuns were on that trip with us. And we brought all those Howard students. And since then, we've been back several times. But this time with 240, we're talking about maybe, even though that's a quarter of the 1,000 that went in 87, this is the largest group, certainly to come post-COVID. The largest group I'm aware of, even of Africans who have traveled to the Nile Valley in quite some time. Sometimes we run into Ashwa Quasi. Last time we ran into Ashwa Quasi and them, we were at Abu Simbel, and they were coming out of the Temple of Ramses. We were going in. So anyway, it's going to really be something. And all of this is sorry, Mike, I had to say that because we spent 2 hours, as you know, in office hours last Monday going through this curriculum, and I'm gonna, with my eye on the clock, go through some of it now, but in the context of what we're talking about. In fact, let me just pause here and connect these things together, because we started with where we're going, and we'll do office hours Monday night because we don't leave here until Tuesday. So I had my days. I'm always thinking ahead. That way, I'm not too far ahead. In my mind, it's all time released. So I'm thinking, okay, we're leaving Monday. No, it's Tuesday. Okay, so I'm prepared for Monday. I spent yesterday trying to get a lot of stuff done, and when we get out of here, I'm going to continue, and then we'll be ready. But again, both hands on your passport. Put your eye on it. Don't play. In fact, make a photocopy. In fact, scan it, a copy, and put it on your device, or keep. These passports are the thing that allow you to move from place to place. Again, in the social structure we live in, this is the document, the key document that enables all others. So, Kemet, we're traveling. We go to Kemet for several reasons. In fact, I'm going to pull a couple of other things. As I was saying, this Edward Blyden, the stories that come with books. We've been going to Nile Valley a long time. They couldn't tell me where they got these books from. And I'm saying, now this is criminal. Now I ain't mad at y'all. I'm gonna take them because, in fact, they did a reprint. I had a copy of this too, but this is a better copy. I got this one. This is Archie Alexander, the story of Archie Alexander. This the brother who remember when they was throwing statues away, and then they decided, the statue in Emancipation Park here in D.C., where Mary McLeod Bethune has a statue, but they had that statue that was unveiled when Fred Douglass spoke at the unveiling and said, yeah, Lincoln was a friend of Black people, but the Negro, but he was y'all's president, not our president. And U.S. Grant is sitting there, and several Supreme Court justices, and Douglass basically mows them all down because Black people don't want to raise the money for this statue. That's the statue with Lincoln standing there, and this brother here on his knees. Well, the brother there whose family was there who helped raise money, his name is Archer Alexander, and this is his story. The story of Archer Alexander, From Slavery to Freedom, March 30th, 1863. William Eliot wrote this, and of course, he dedicated it to Jesse Benton Fremont, which is his whole story, without whose personal sympathy and active influence, the work of the Western Sanitary Commission could not have been begun nor successfully prosecuted. This little book is most respectfully inscribed, and he talks about the history of Alexander. This is the brother who some people, unfortunately, because they don't know his name, call him the kneeling slave. Whatever, the point is this. So they had this and say, where did y'all get these books? Because I want to know. But the real, I still got them in the shrink. I'll be real careful with these because all of mine are hardbound. These are the first unhardbound copies that I have. The softbound copies in their original form of the Negro Yearbook. Remember, we talked about Monroe work. This is the 1925-26 edition. I'm going to be very gentle with this. This is the 1918-1919 edition. And then the last one here is the 1920-21 edition. I'm going to put these back in there. Again, books are one thing. The story behind where the books came from are quite another. And I want to know. I want to know where these books came from. And then there are a couple of things I picked up to give. I'm going to give this book. I got a student in mind for this book. The incoming president of Howard University, Ben Vincent III, is a scholar of the African presence in Spanish diaspora, Spanish America, particularly Mexico. He's written a couple of very important books on like Black soldiers in Mexico, colonial Mexico. This is the idea of Africans in the Spanish speaking world are very important. And this is a book that a lot of people relied on for many years. This is Leslie Rout, who was at Michigan State University for a number of years. In 1976, Rout published this book, The African Experience in Spanish America. And since it was only $3, I picked it up to give it to somebody. That's nothing when you're buying books. If you got a copy and you get a couple of dollars, whatever, buy it and give it to somebody, particularly a young person. Help them build their libraries. Bloxon did that for me. Blossom gave me copies of books that I still haven't seen other places. Richard Robert Wright's History of the AME Church. He gave me a copy of Sir Harry Johnson, The Colonization of Africa by Alien Races being white people. A Tropical Dependency, Flora Shaw Lugard. You know, when a man like Charles Blockson puts a book in your hand that's 100 years old and says, I want you to have this, is two things you know. Number one, he loves you because we don't give books. And number two, he probably got about 8 copies. Anyway, that's oh man. But anyway, he gave me a copy of Frederick Douglass's first autobiography, the 1845 version. Yeah, I don't know if I've even said it out of my mouth in many years, but the point is that we're building something over this last several years in this conversation. You know, the ground we've covered, really, in my mind, is unmatched. I don't know any place that has consistently done this kind of thing. I'm not talking about Black history in 2 minutes. I'm not talking about kind of, you know, let's do a 10-minute video with a lot of funky graphics and nice, you know, and then now I think I know about something when in fact, no. And then at the end, put a bibliography, boom, boom. No, we're talking about kind of broad conversational engagement and exposure, as you say, Prof, breadcrumbs, for 177 weeks in a row. And then with the expansion and extension of narrative and Nubia, the potential now, the tapping into potential of all of us collectively sharing and bringing this together. And what we'll be doing in the Nile Valley for 2 weeks is, in addition to having this material kind of connection with these architects of so much of what we call human society today, astronomy, history in terms of memory keeping and inscription, architecture, agriculture, all of these various forms. In addition to that, we are also going to be engaged in the conversation with each other. And so this is just deepens and extends the conversations that we've been having in this very essential place. And no, so this isn't a quick drive-by exposure. This isn't the wielding around of a written curriculum as a battle document that most people won't read and the teachers who have it imposed on them won't use. So, I mean, this is a conversation on curriculum. But at any rate, so yeah, we'll be going there. I'll come back to that in a minute. But as we talked about Monday night in office hours, for those who were in Nubia, and as we'll kind of, you know, tie some of these things together on this coming Monday night as we get ready to take off for the Nile Valley, some of us, and report back. So, you know, stay tuned. The question of curriculum. A curriculum is just a course of study, a proposed course of study. The question of standards in curriculum, which is an articulation of what you expect students to be able to know and be able to do. And then the question of benchmarks for those standards, meaning what? How are you going to measure how they know what they do and what they can do over time, increments of a week or 2 weeks or 6-week units, or, you know, those things that used to be still tied to report cards or midterms and final exams, this kind of thing. And by the way, there are no assessments laid out in the curriculum that's everybody been talking about. You know, assessments drive instruction. So you got to see the test to see how teachers and others are going to be measured on how well these students acquire this knowledge. Now, we could say, you know, the moon is made of green cheese and the sky is red. Yes, that's in the curriculum. Okay, but what's on the test? Well, the test's not going to ask about the color of the sky. Okay, so how you going to measure whether or not I teach these kids? Well, if we do a pop-in assessment and see what the kids are talking about, if somebody complains and said, my teacher said the sky was blue. Well, then we're going to bring you up. And then you say, okay, the sky is blue. And then we're going to slink back to our corner. See, curriculum, anyway, we'll come back. My point is, if it ain't on the test, then it diminishes in terms of importance to those who are delivering instruction. Assessment drives instruction often, so let's not get caught up in curriculum. But we did talk about it, and it's very important. I had a conversation the other day with a journalist from Time Magazine who reached out. And we had a conversation about this because there's been some pushback. People this week, and Prof, I don't know if you have any thoughts this morning. I know it's been a searing story, but on how people are picking up sides in this curriculum debate around these Florida standards. I mean, everybody got an opinion, and they all seem to be fixated on that one page that we talked about last week, and then talked about much more extensively on Monday night in office hours. page 6 there, the Florida standards. In fact, let me pull it up. SS 68, SS Social Studies Standard for the 6th through 8th grade middle school, African American number 2, analyze events that involved or affected Africans from the founding of the nation through Reconstruction. That, of course, is what should be called the standard. Right? That's
once you laid it out, there was no reason to put any more energy on it. I got other things to do. So I appreciate you allowing me to not fixate on it myself.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. And we talked about this next week, so we're not going to repeat. Y'all should go back and look at last week's conversation. And if you're in office hours, you get a chance in the Nubia archive to access the video. You can see us going through that, including thank you to folk who came in to have conversation, including our sister from Tampa, who came in, who is an educator, who approached the conversation on Monday night as a parent, talking about exactly what we were talking about, the curriculum wars and what does and doesn't change as a result. And I conveyed some of that yesterday in the conversation. Somebody will probably find it while I'm talking, because I think Olivia Waxman was the author of the article in Time magazine. She's a longtime journalist writing on education and politics for Time. And so, what I said was, any educator would tell you. I said a lot of other things, but I think what she quoted me for is, any educator would tell you, teachers don't follow the curriculum like a Bible. It's not like you quoting chapter and verse from the Bible. It's like, and it's a bad analogy, but I'm gonna make it for those of you who might have some legal training or be aware of lawyers. It's almost like it's not even as potent as the Universal Commercial Code, like the UCC or the Restatement of Torts, if you want to go a step beyond. In other words, here's the broad concept of commercial transactions as articulated in a broad document outlining this is how the law works. But that's not a statute. That's not the rule you have to follow when you go into court. That's not what you have to guide when you're writing a contract. It's just the restatement. It's just a kind of articulation of how this code works. But it isn't crafted. It isn't the law in Minnesota or Maryland or Delaware. It's not the federal law. It's just a broad framework. Now, curriculum ain't even that tight. Everybody in the United States, if you're taking a test, and if you're in the Caribbean, you take a test, or if you're in the continent of Africa or in Europe, you take a test. It used to be you take the test in Ghana or Nigeria, they send a test to Europe to grade. Why? To decide whether or not you're qualified or based on your test score to get to a particular university. I mean, why are you sending it to Europe? Because we wrote the assessments. Here in the United States, it's the SAT, the ACT. Okay, is it going to be on those tests? No. Well, then, okay. If you're talking about advanced placement, it's going to be on the AP test. No. So when you even talk about the curriculum for the AP African American Studies course, which I was asked about yesterday, the question then becomes, what are we talking about when we're arguing about curriculum? Curriculum are political documents. And one of the things that has come out over the last couple of days or last week or so, some of the people who are pushing back against this criticism of the benchmark under what I just read, the benchmark which says examine the various duties and trades performed by slaves, such as agricultural work, painting, carpentry, tailoring, domestic service, blacksmithing, transportation, and the clarification that says instruction includes how slaves develop skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. And let me just pause here and say again, you see the standard uses the word Africans from the founding of the nation through Reconstruction. The benchmark says slaves. Tells me that there was some debate on the committee on the language to use, and rather than be exclusive, they were inclusive. Now, at the same time, people have been arguing, rightfully so, over this idea of how these skills could be developed for their personal benefit. Personal benefit? What the hell are you saying? People went through slavery. Okay, now we got to be careful, because nobody has articulated how we define personal benefit. So the other thing I said that I was quoted for in this article was that the skills that Africans brought with them from Africa, the skills that they acquired here under duress, forced to acquire, and commingled the skills they brought with them, the agricultural skills of Black women, for example, in South Carolina, the technical skills of the Mende blacksmiths in places like Louisiana and South Carolina, whatever the skills, architecture, carpentry, all these things that people brought with them and then had to use under duress and then acquired other skills. Personal benefit needs to be defined. I said, because many of those skills were used for liberation struggles. And when I think personal benefit, I'm thinking collectively. I realize that's not the universal definition, but I also realize there is no universal definition. You can't square a circle. And she quoted me for that in terms of this idea that liberation was what those skills were used for. An example I gave, we had a long conversation. Obviously, she just got a short article to write. So, but one of the examples I gave, I thought about medicinal skills, right? Medicinal skills that, and I didn't talk about this Monday night in office hour, so I'll mention it here in passing on the way to where I really want to go today. We've already entered it, but I want to tie some of these things together. Montpelier, the plantation home of James and Dolly Madison. Paul Hennings, after James Madison died, helped take care of Dolly Madison, giving her money. He was enslaved on that plantation. He actually enslaved in D.C., Paul Jennings. You can read his memoir. He's the one that saved the Gilbert Stuart painting that became the face of the dollar bill that I ripped up in 1996 in front of the Ghanaian children. And then the child came to me and said, give your mama this coin with a CD on it. We talking revalue. Come on, personal benefit. Drew, do you want to dance? Do you want to dance? You don't want to dance. I can make you dance if you want. Anyway, the point is this. Paul Jennings took care of the Madisons after the death of James Madison, but James Madison had Paul Jennings and others enslaved on that plantation. Montpelier, as I told her yesterday, I said, I remember standing in the dark at Montpelier, my first time spending the night on a plantation, because we had been called there by some historical preservationists and others who are grappling with the question of how you create and preserve sites of memory in the United States. And Montpelier was a place where they were having that conversation. And I agreed to drive down and be in that conversation. I was great to be there with folks like Ann Chin, who has done a great deal of work around marking sites of enslavement around the world. So sites, Ann Chin, whose partner, Charlie Cobb, of course, the great historian, the great memory keeper with National Geographic, and written many books, but most importantly, the great son of a genealogy, his father, a minister who's featured in Holly Greenman's film, The Wilmington 10, brilliant culture keeper, Charlie Cobb, the son, who, of course, was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Just a first-rate mind. His partner, Ann Chin, of course, who is at the center of the memory-keeping monuments, the diaspora monuments, the monuments marking the traumas and the triumphs of Africans over enslavement. Those markers are all over the world, including West Africa. Again, that side of the Atlantic that I chose to stand in. If my feet was going to touch that water, it wasn't going to be from this side, not first. But at any rate, Ann was at that meeting. My man Brent Leggs, who should always be raised. This is the brother who is with the historical preservation work, who does the historical preservation work, the National Historical Trust. He is in the room, and mind you, make no mistake, when Chicago, the Kojic Church, where the funeral of Emmett Till was held, was declared a national monument. When the site along the river, where Emmett Till was believed to be pulled out, and the courthouse there, where those white men were let go, whose names we won't even repeat now, and the liar wife of one of them, who has now got to work out her own soul salvation for eternity on the other side. Brent was at the table for that conversation that led to those historical preservation conferences. Brent was there at that meeting, and a number of other people. But I remember the day we got there, that night, we had a kind of outside thing. They had fires, and we were in the area of the plantation where the enslaved lived. It's very surreal for me. But again, I don't make a distinction in many ways between standing there in front of the places where our ancestors were enslaved at Montpelier and standing in the temple of Ramses II in Abu Simbel, in standing at the burial site of Harriet Ross Tubman, Araminta, in New York, and standing in front of the entrance to the tomb of Tutankhamun. I don't make a distinction between being able to be at the New York African Burial Ground and standing in front of the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, which is the largest national cemetery in the world. because Kemet was in continuous formation for more than 3,000 years. So take Arlington National Cemetery times 10, and you still got to go some more centuries to get to what Saqqara was. And most of it remains unexcavated under all that sand. So to stand there on that Saqqara plateau where Imhotep, directing work for Djoser in the Old Kingdom, built that step pyramid, it's before Snefru, before Hufu Hafre and Menkaure, those pyramids we see all the time, the ones that Maurice White and his boys put on the album covers. Stand there and hear nothing because the wind is just blowing across that hot plateau and that sand. Retake your fame. So when I go to New York African Burial Ground, those Africans and the other ones I've been over the place, they all in one thing in my mind. So when I was there at Montpelier, standing there where these Africans had been enslaved, in conversation with these folk who had gathered, different backgrounds, different races. Evan Brooks Higginbotham, my friend Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham was there. We sat around talking. And Doug Chambers was there, who published a book called Murder at Montpelier. Murder was the case that they gave me. That's the other thing. The things just run together in my mind. Standing in the tomb in the mortuary temple of Ramses II, as on the walls you see him with the battle crown of Kemet as the Purwa in his chariot running over these invaders and talking about how he plunged down in the middle of them and held them all off and fought them till his regiment got there, and he by himself. And he said this guy couldn't have killed all these people by himself. But all I could do is I'm sitting there looking at the Meta and hearing Mario Beatty over there reading the wall, and I'm looking at this chariot, and all I could think of was 50 Cent. Many men wish death upon me, blood on my eyes, dog, and I can't see. Oh, Pixels trying to take my life away. I mean, this is this is this Shango energy up here. This is this Ogun energy right here. In other words, from the other side of Africa, and over here on this wall, millennia before that. And so I'm like, man, this cat is up here fighting all these people. Now, of course, it didn't go down that way, but he clearly lived to tell the tale. I'm just fascinated by this. So anyway, standing at Montpelier, murder was the case that they gave me is going through my mind as I'm talking to this scholar who has written this book, Murder at Montpelier, about how the Igbo women on that plantation very likely killed James Madison's grandfather using poisons developed from plants that they acquired the knowledge of what these plants could do, commingling with the knowledge of what they knew plants in Africa could do there on the plantation. And they killed James Madison's grandfather, again, going to the Florida benchmark standards, instruction of how slaves develop skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. Personal benefit. I'm defining it as we, not E and O sisters got together. And I asked Doug Chambers, I said, Prof, you really think those women killed James Madison's grandfather? I read your book. He said, yeah. He says, I think a strong case could be made for it. And what's fascinating is not only the murder, which isn't murder. Is it murder when somebody has you enslaved? Do you want to dance? Do you want to dance? Come on, Drew. With these curricula, is it murder when you're killing somebody that has you captive? When you're in Boston and they pass ordinances that say black women can't cook inside no more because the houses keep burning down. It ain't stupidity, it's tactics. Instructions include how slaves develop skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit, as I told Olivia Waxman yesterday. If you're talking about developing skills for liberation, then, or as the man told me in Charleston, South Carolina one time, standing outside one of them churches in downtown Charleston as I had come over from Mother Emanuel, of course, where the murderer Dilla Ruth went in. That is murder. But, I'm standing in front of the church and the brother's like, you see all this ordinate ironwork and all these symbols in the ironwork? Yeah. I said, yeah. He said, yeah. As the story goes, as we passed it down, the Africans said, whatever y'all praying to in that white house right there, and you want us to build a fence, we're going to build a fence around it and put symbols in this fence, because whatever you praying to in there, we don't want to escape out from there. So we're going to fence you in with what we believe. Slaves developed skills. They were blacksmiths before they came to South Carolina. And then whatever you taught them or they had to learn under duress here, they brought with what they brought. They used it to protect themselves. Personal benefit. Do you want to dance, Drew, with your little friends? But at any rate, standing there, Doug Chambers said, yeah, I think a case can be made. And then after he was dead, James Madison's grandmother, working out her own soul salvation, which would include ownership now of this plantation, Chambers writes about the possibility that they had a deal. What's the deal? Well, the deal is we're going to put y'all on trial for killing my husband. But the person who got convicted, it was a brother who got convicted of being part of the conspiracy. But the women who were kind of known in the governance formations of probably being the ones, they were still enslaved, but they were not punished. What the hell? So if the grandfather is dead, who gets the plantation? The grandmother. Professor Chambers, are you saying that this white woman made a deal with those black women? I don't know. I'm just. Instruction includes how slaves develop skills. We get caught up in reading things the way white people read them. Maybe one of them skills is diplomacy. Anyway, I don't know. But the point is this. As we think about these curriculum standards, what I said yesterday, that, personal benefit for enslaved people is resistance. The skills came with us. We commingled them with things we had to learn here to survive, and we used them very often to resist. So that is not how that curriculum is being written. I mean, that wasn't why it was written like that. I agree with that. I'm against the curriculum in that sense. It is not how it's being used because we have an underdeveloped sense of we, and our we is often commingled with a we that is clearly a social structure creation that is antithetical to anybody's life, regardless of culture or race. But we can use it the way we need to use it, particularly when there's no test affiliated with it, associated with it. That doesn't diminish the fact there's going to be a war of people calling texts on the teachers and fighting the teachers and pushing them. We talked about that Monday night too. The potential that people will be disciplined or fired and they need a job. This is not to displace any of that, which is very real, which is why we have to organize. We have to come together. We have to mobilize people at a minimum. At the same time, we can also understand that curriculum wars can be very, very, very complicated. And that we have real enemies. The superintendent of Houston Independent School District is now shuttering libraries in Houston and converting some of those places to detention centers, discipline centers for students. I was reading it, and then Aya Nelly sent me an article. My sister, Gussie Fuller, sent me an article because she's down there in Missouri City, neighboring all the y'all from Texas. Y'all know what they're doing because the state took over the Houston Independent School District because they didn't want you Negroes running things for yourself. They didn't want you indigenous people running things for yourself. So, the white nationalists in Texas, they're not playing any games. We need to stop playing games. Okay. So I want to spend this final little part tying things together a little bit and doing it in a way that kind of maybe helps make a sense of, what we're talking about. Yeah, Roxanne, I'm looking in the Nubia chat. Diplomacy is definitely innate for us. Diplomacy in Virginia in the late 18th century, when you are enslaved, is a skill that you're going to have with a white woman whose husband and her got you enslaved, and somehow you live to tell the tale after killing her husband. Gives a whole new meaning to the benchmark clarification. Instruction includes how slaves develop skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. Do you want to dance? Do you? Because I can make you dance if you want. All right. One of the things I wanted to talk about this morning, just for a little bit, and we've already kind of laid it out, but I want to tie things together very clearly now, is why Kemet? Why go to Kemet? Why go to Egypt? People say, you're going to Egypt. Your people are not from East Africa. They're from West Africa. Okay, here we go. Okay, why go to Kemet? Why can't we just talk about the Black achievement here? Why can't we talk about Mae Jemison? And why can't we talk about, Frederick Douglass? Why can't we talk about, hey. This isn't either or. Don't use that dichotomous logic here. We have to understand that study is a political act. Well, we ain't got to do nothing, but we will suffer if we don't understand that. And so in preparing to go in a couple of days to the Nile Valley, to return to the Nile Valley again, I think this might be the 8th or 9th time I've been. Never with a group this large and so many good and grown folks. COVID rewrote everything. We've jailbroken the university concept. And this is why in about 2 minutes, all this is going to become a little bit clearer, I hope. The whole concept of how the universities and the kind of hierarchical nature of education in this society and human society, unfortunately, in the so-called modern world, contemporary world, has shaped the way we think about things. This is why what we're doing is so important. And this is why traveling together with an intergenerational group that is anchored and centered in good and grown adults, but we'll have some children too, with people from all over. There are people traveling, Jack Cole coming up from South Africa. We got folk coming from Europe. Kat Adams is going to come across with Sister Micaiah. They coming from West Africa to East Africa. All this convening together gives a different energy. Everybody's bringing their brick to have conversation as we are going through these spaces. Some of it is about ritual of return. It's why people go to the Cathedral of Notre Dame, the Cathedral of Our Lady in Paris, the place of Isis. So of course, you got to go. Now, when you're ready, we're going to take you to a late period site, an island. That would be the island where there is a temple to Aset or Isis at a place called Philae. And when you stand there, now you understand where Notre Dame got it from. Ooh, my goodness. And you can go back to Notre Dame. But when you go back, you be like, okay, you got this from here. You got that double column from here. You got the whole pulpit and the way you set up your church from there. Why? No, I was standing there. You can't. I can't be fooled by CGI or AI or any other kind of eye. I was literally in the place. So when you take the bus trip with all those young people to Washington, D.C., to see the Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial and all that kind of stuff, yeah, I was at Wasset. So now I know where y'all got it from. And don't say you didn't, because we will trace from the day they built that to the day you built this, chapter and verse. Do you want to dance? Because I can make you dance if you want. This is the threat. Why Kemet is a threat to the illusion. Today's New York Times. No, not today. Not today. Today was my man Charlie Blow. Charles Blow say, let me see. This is Friday. This is yesterday. Where did Charles Blow? Where's that Charles Blow? Oh, come on, son. Let me see. Y'all give me a second because Blow. Here we go. This is Charles Blow today. And I think Charles Blow wrote an excellent article in today's, Brother Blow. Charles Blow says, last week, Florida approved an overhaul of its African-American history standards, including guidance that middle schoolers should be instructed that slaves developed skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. Outrage ensued, including from Vice President Kamala Harris, who blasted the standards saying, quote, they insult us in an attempt to gaslight us, end quote. She's right, Charles Blow writes. But I think the project underway in Florida is far larger and far more consequential than many comprehend. The insult to Black people and to the country is incidental. In the same way that Donald Trump made his bones as America's white nationalist in chief, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida is trying to make his as the country's chief Christian nationalist, a subset of white supremacy that holds that God has ordained America as a Christian nation and that its ideals must be protected from the encroachment of pluralism, racial, religious, or otherwise. In February 2022, in a speech at Hillsdale College, a private Christian school in Michigan, DeSantis said, put on the full armor of God, stand firm against the left schemes. You will face flaming arrows, but if you have the shield of faith, you will overcome them. And in Florida, we walk the same line here. Okay, I'm going to keep going, but let me pause here and say, remember Hillsdale College? We talked about this 2 years ago when, just as Trump was going out the door, they released the 1776 Commission report about America and its values and that kind of thing as a kind of counter or challenge to the 1619 project. And if you remember at the time, if you go back and look in the archive, you'll see, in my mind, 1619 and 1776 the same number. Because until you can distinguish between the cultural meaning making, the ways of knowing, the use of science and technology, the process of passing movement and memory through time and space between African people, both in their specific cultural formations and how those formations commingled through the process of the collective traumas of enslavement and colonialism. Until you can make that distinction, until there are some clear definitions or some clear ideas about how different people look at different things, then simply having an ordinal reclassification, as Jacob Carruthers would say, 1619 is before 1776. This is the real founding. Okay, my question is, why would you want to buy in so deeply to a founding date for a settler colony criminal enterprise? Philosophically, in terms of a way of knowing, in terms of how you're thinking about time and space, you're saying the underlying message is, I am all in on this enterprise. I think it could be perfected once you include me, once you treat people more humanely. But what you're doing with every iteration of saying something like that, you are literally fighting back against the idea of the thing that you're trying to now be included in to transform. Can you transform it without destroying it? The answer is no. You cannot. This is why curriculum are political documents. They are statements of ways of knowing. They are statements of movement and memory. They are statements of cultural meaning making. They are statements of governance within a different social structure. You can't fix it without challenging its underlying assumptions. Michael Apple calls it the invisible curriculum. My man Jelani Favors down in North Carolina A&T, when he talks about how people push back on that, it's some black people at black colleges, the second curriculum. I mean, their curriculum are political documents. When Charles Blow says that these guys are white Christian nationalists, because you can't even call them Christian nationalists. Why? Because personal benefit. Go ask Jesus Christ about personal benefit. Personal benefit. He would not come down from the cross just to use his skills for his personal benefit. He decided to die just so you can't be a Christian. Come on, Reverend Wright. Reverend Dr. Wright. Only reason I'm talking now is because you in the chat, but I would much prefer you or Freddie Haynes take this, or Bishop Kamasi Nelson, or Bishop Albert Clay, whose granddaughter now is getting ready to graduate from Howard in a year, to a grandson in Morehouse, Pearl Clay's kids. But the point is this: I would much prefer one of y'all do this, Bishop Bastow McKenzie. But the point is this: personal benefit and Christianity are oxymoronic if you're taking it from its founding ways of knowing. Not from the way the Romans snatched it for personal benefit. Shout out to the Pope. Except Francis. They don't like him. Why? Because I'm trying to expand this. Anyway, the point is this. You got to say white Christian nationalists. And what Charles Blow is saying in this article is that this whole contretemps is about white Christian nationalism. It ain't even about black people, really. It's about a way of knowing that props up this hierarchical oppressive system. And that system will tell women to go somewhere and sit down, say slavery's okay, and don't say it don't, because y'all be real Old Testament when it comes to you keeping your thing, white Christian nationalists, the Klan riding high. He goes on at the end, he says, insulting black people may be an effect, but it's not its ultimate aim. As Anthea Butler, a professor of religious studies at the University of Pennsylvania and the author of White Evangelical Racism, the Politics of Morality in America, told me, Christian nationalists don't care about insulting black people. They're on a mission to establish a pretension of naivete to absolve whiteness of guilt. Kind of sounds a little bit like what our brother and friend Mike Harriet wrote in The Root the other day. It's about whiteness, not blackness. As she put it, we are just pawns to their narrative of how they want to make greatness. Sure, absolutely. But yesterday's New York Times had an article by this guy, one of the chief architects of this mess, Christopher Rufo. We know the name Chris Rufo. Y'all publishing Rufo in the New York Times. Of course, the New York Times is a social structure paper. I prefer it in the Financial Times, some other things, because the Financial Times will at least keep you aware of how the criminal enterprise is unfolding. Again, y'all see while we over here having a conversation in the U.S., those of us on the continent of Africa and other places keeping track of what's going on in Africa. You saw you just had a coup d'etat in Mali. Well, they also had a big meeting in St. Petersburg called the Africa Summit. And who was at the Africa Summit? These continental African leaders saying that they ain't gonna deal with colonialism the same way. We shouldn't be enslaved. The brother from Burkina Faso who took over after the coup d'etat said that. Vladimir Putin sitting there clapping. People saying, wait a minute, I thought we was against Putin. I think we should be for ourselves, which means we should put aside all these social structure media platforms and try to do some research and have conversations on ourselves and try to not pick sides unless or until we kind of know more of what's going on. But here's the thing that struck me. This is the front page of yesterday's Financial Times. What the hell? Who the hell? Oh, this is Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of the Russian paramilitary group Wagner, shakes hands with Freddie Mapuka, from the Central African Republic delegation yesterday in St. Petersburg. That's the guy right there with all the militaries in Africa, backing a lot of the people who are doing the coups, putting the French out. And they saying French not going to be the official language no more. How do you make sense of this? Conference call. Exiled Wagner boss appeals at sidelines of Africa Summer in St. Petersburg. We better look. You can't trust any of them. I would trust these papers before, and by trust, I mean I get more information from them. But the New York Times said we got to be even-handed. So we're going to give space to the white nationalist Christopher Rufo, who is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, who is helping to lead this charge. He's the one who, one of the ones that the governor of Florida appointed to be on the board of one of the Florida universities. This is the new college. He's on the board of that. But here's what I'm going to go with this as we kind of tie this together. Rufo writes this whole article called University DEI Efforts Work Against Liberal Education. So K-12, you got these standards, which Charles Blow is saying is part ideologically of this white Christian nationalist move to render a concept of America that is very true to its founders and origins, even though many of its founders were not Christian and deists, really. But philosophically, this centering of the individual, personal benefit, the cultural assumptions in white Christian nationalism fit comfortably for interpretation in the cultural assumptions of the colonial logics of the English, of the French, or the Spanish, or the Portuguese. Even though the French, Spanish, and Portuguese are going to cluster together more closely than the English, ultimately, as they resolve some of their tensions, or at least incorporate them on this side of the Atlantic, wrong side, of the Atlantic, what you might call a melting pot thesis, the melting pot melts them into white. And as Thurgood Marshall famously said in his Descent from Baki, the Negro didn't get melted down. Thank God, Du Bois might say, because if you melt the Negro down into that, which is what we were talking about last week, assimilation is annihilation. Because if you lose your cultural self, you lose any shot at changing the fundamental terms about which this settler state has been created. In fact, the contemporary world, you've got to contribute your unique ways of looking at the world to the larger human conversation, which is why I say 1619 and 1776 is the same date if philosophically and culturally you have abandoned some of the things you brought with you, some of those skills, which are also cultural meaning making, which you use to resist for your personal meaning collective benefit. If you abandon that, then yeah, I see why you got problems with this Florida curriculum, because you don't have no place to stand. You don't even remember enough to resist. In fact, you are not your ancestors at that point, and you damn sure ain't their wildest dream. Rufo writes, academia is in the midst of a generational turmoil. Blue states such as California and Oregon have recently transformed their public universities with expansive diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that have profound implications for admissions, speech, hiring, and scholarship. Red states such as Florida and Texas have recently passed legislation abolishing them, concluding that the programs that have sprung up to execute DEI promote a stifling orthodoxy that undermines the pursuit of truth. He says, he goes on, I'm going to get to the point, because he talks about, he gives his bona fides. Right, he's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Going to be important. Let me put my timer on. Going to be important in about 5 minutes. Keep that in your mind. Manhattan Institute. He was recently appointed by DeSantis as a trustee of New College. They're trying to have this model college for their white Christian nationalist belief. This is what he says. He says the most significant question looming over this debate is one that unfortunately has rarely been posed by either critics or supporters of DEI programs. What is the purpose of a university? For most of the classical liberal tradition, the purpose of the university was to produce scholarship in the pursuit of the true, the good, and the beautiful. The university was conceived as a home for a community of scholars who pursued a variety of disciplines, but were united in a shared commitment to inquiry, research, and debate, all directed toward the pursuit of the highest good, rather than the immediate interests of partisan politics. I'm going to summarize this. I'm not going to read through this whole thing. I just want you to know that Christopher Rufo, a right-winger who the New York Times gave real estate for yesterday to have a conversation about his perspective, which I embrace because I don't have any investment in the New York Times. I'm glad they're letting everybody talk. Some people losing their minds, but that's because they think somehow the New York Times is for them. One of these days, we're going to figure out. But there ain't no such thing called the United States as a nation. And that people protect their interests. But the reason I read this, because Christopher Rufo's challenges, he's talking about classical education. By classical, he means white. The curriculum in Florida K-12 is centering whiteness, as Mike Harriet wrote, and the blackness they want to bring in is an accessorizing blackness that reinforces those fundamental values: individualism, free market, capitalism, profit, all these kind of things. Okay, fine. But here's the problem. The problem ain't them. The problem is us. The problem is when we accept that and then argue as if somehow we got some shared understanding of what we're talking about. We don't have a shared understanding. Rufo's argument is that you should eliminate diversity and then people would just earn their way into the conversation, and the teachers and the students anyway should be the ones driving it, not the administrators. But he don't even mean that, because they're trying to get rid of the teachers and administrators. At that very same University of Florida, where Ken Nunn taught, where Priscilla Nunn taught, who went with us to Kemet, of course, who's Nefertiti's father, Asa Hilliard leading that, and Ken's son-in-law, father-in-law, leading that very same university had 5 recent openings in the African American Studies department. My man Dave Canton chaired that department down there, my old buddy from grad school. And they can't get black people to come. People boycotting Florida, but as we talked about on Monday night, the people in Florida are resisting from within, and we need to be able to support them. Even as we make these broad political gestures, we have to understand that we're not going to give Florida up to you, because we can make you dance if we want, but our ultimate objective is to repair ourselves, and this curriculum is not going to slow us down. In fact, we can reach inside the curriculum and turn it inside out, and that's if we're using the curriculum. All the teachers will tell you don't follow the curriculum like a Bible. Certainly if it's not on the assessment, the state assessment, the local assessment, the local school board, what's going on in your school, they're going to have to do a whole lot more work before they can put this ironclad thing down at the level of the classroom. And they ain't even got muscle like that. First of all, they stupid, but that's a story for another day. Or maybe it is for today. The 5 minutes is about 2.5 minutes in. So let me get to the point I want to make about the Manhattan Institute as we talk about this process. But before I do, let me put a footnote on this question of the purpose of the university. As we know, when we read W.E.B. Du Bois, and I'm thinking, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I think we might need to just put Du Bois as the education of black people as something we do in office hours at some point. We just need to read the whole book. Because Du Bois tried to tell us over a century ago about this. In speech after speech after speech, what is the nature of education? What is the nature of a university? When we go to the tomb of Ptah-hotep in Giza on the Saqqara Plateau, when we see Ptah-hotep, when we think about the phrase Medu Yawu, train your replacement, creating a staff of old age, the purpose of education is to replicate your society in the next generation, to hand on that work. Well, since there is no such thing called the United States of America as a broad national idea that we all share, the curriculum wars are wars over how you can perceive this society, because one of the functions of education is socialization. This is why the wars are so viscerally fought, particularly among politicians and academics and folks who have not been in the classroom. In fact, what I told Livy yesterday is the farther you get away from the classroom, the more confused you get about what's going on in the classroom. These standards wouldn't slow me down. In fact, these standards won't slow a lot of teachers down. Now we're gonna have to fight, because they're gonna try to fire them. They're gonna challenge them. But one thing that if you got facts on your side and enough of us support you and back you, you can break the backs of these people. We can make you dance if you want. But the point is this: in this process, what Rufo is saying, his definition of university is different than Du Bois's. Du Bois said our universities must ground in our culture. They don't. The problem of DEI at HWCUs, at PWIs, at predominantly white institutions or historically white colleges and universities, that's a problem of them accentuating the framework the way they see the university. HBCUs, increasingly, unfortunately, almost like DEIUs, the whole university. HBCUs or PBIs, predominantly black institutions or historically black college universities. If your framework is indistinguishable from the white schools, then you have not met Du Bois's challenge. Du Bois said, what does it look like? There are universals in human experience, but there are many ways to get there. As Dan Black, quoting from the Bible, named one of his novels, there's 12 gates to the city. There are many ways to get there. What is our gates? Where are our gates? What are our groundings? The university has remained unimagined among African people, and the irony is we are the ones who created the foundation for what they now call the university. We are literally going to be standing in some of those spaces. We're going to be standing in places where the scribes gathered. And this is the foundation for anything Bologna, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale. Yeah, now they got their own spin on it, which is what Du Bois says they should have. But what is your spin? Where is your mosque at Sankore at Timbuktu? Where is your concept of the higher education space? What we've done by jailbreaking the university is clear the space for us to remember, for gathering the momentum of memory so we can set ourselves again. And that setting is not a hierarchy based on test scores and grades. In fact, Lonnie Guinier, before she made transition, her last book was called The Tyranny of the Meritocracy, Democratizing Higher Education in America, Lonnie Guinier, 2015. And what she says in here is, if you go to college or university in the United States, she said, once you get past the first year, maybe two, your test scores and grades aren't really what marking your achievement. What's marking your achievement is your performance in the space that you're in, and that the key to successful learning is collaborative learning, is learning collectively. She said, I even propose that students take tests together, work collectively. Well, that speaks to what Du Bois said. He said, I saw a perfect system of education in Africa. Everybody was in a circle working together, the elders helping to guide and teach, and the young people are learning. Everybody's moving together. Collective learning. Well, that blows the doors off of this idea of rat race, survivor-based, voted off the island type individual test score and grade-based achievement. But guess what? That is what allows the hierarchy to replicate itself. And that's what's replicated in these Florida standards. Individuals. Instruction includes how slaves develop skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. Yeah, you had individuals. You sure did. Harriet Tubman was an individual. And then she went back and got 300 more individuals. Son, what are you talking about? You had greedy individuals. Certainly, Europe has no monopoly on individualism. So you're going to find examples like that, but for every example like that, you're going to find many more examples under the duress of resistance where Africans collectively came together and resisted and used. Personal benefit did not mean their individual benefit alone. It meant collective. And so when Lonnie Guinier is talking about rethinking higher education, she is presenting a challenge to Christopher Rufo's idea of the university, as is Du Bois. And so let's turn finally to this person of curriculum. Oh, one other thing, Manhattan Institute. My 5 minutes is up. Christopher Rufo works at the Manhattan Institute. So I'm digging through Manhattan Institute. This is a book that the Manhattan Institute published in 1994. Let me make sure. I think it's 94. Yeah, February 1994. It's called Alternatives to Afrocentrism, the Center for the New American Community, Manhattan Institute. Linda Chavez, some of y'all remember that name. John J. Miller, they call something called the Center for a New American Community. The Manhattan Institute was founded by some millionaires and billionaires to come together. These are the people that were on their board at that time in 94. Linda Chavez, John Miller, some of these names. Michael Myers was a prominent Negro. You see him in the New York Times every once in a while. Albert Shanker. Oh, we should talk about Ocean Hill, Brownsville. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Abigail Thurnston, another big critic of affirmative action. Albert Shanker, because I talked about Shelby Steele, of course, who was against affirmative action, all this kind of thing, wrote the content of our character. But look at the essays, because this is the point I want to make. What we're seeing in Florida now, all this I'm against CRT stuff that we're seeing, the anti-CRT stuff we're seeing, this is another iteration in what Jacob Carruthers would say is the long intellectual warfare against our people. It is a continuing response to the wars that took place after the end of apartheid, Jim and James Crow in this country. In the 1960s, the Black Power movement, the Black aesthetic movement, the Pan-Africanist movement, the creation of space where African people began to define ourselves, our values, and bring them into those learning spaces. And they created real challenges against this Western system. And they continued to strengthen through the 1970s. And by the 1980s, full-blown conflict breaks out. These are the curriculum battles. This is the things we talked about before when I talk about Arthur Schlesinger, the disuniting of America. This is when I was coming of age. So, Professor Hunter, you asked me about, standing in the right side of the Atlantic as a 31-year-old in 1996. By then, I had been about a decade involved in this as a student and as an apprentice of many of the people who they were trying to crucify: Jacob Carruthers and Leonard Jeffries, Maulana Karenga and Malefi Asante, Marimba Ani and Vivian Gordon. All the, just, trying to crucify them. Why? Because these are mostly university battle, but then they get involved in K-12. Some of y'all were around for those battles. And what you see here is these people funded these Negroes to come and attack the question of African-centeredness. You got Gerald Early, who's going to always be relied on to do that. The Anomaly of Afrocentrism. Wilson Jeremiah Moses, who I sat with one time. I had a lot of respect for John Clark. He writes an interesting article called In Fairness to Afrocentrism. What he says is that the Afrocentric movement must be understood as a variety of utopian or millennialist movements, although the Afrocentric utopia is in a romanticized past rather than a chiliastic future. Afrocentrism is not a new movement. He goes on. He wrote a book called Afrotopia that's very interesting. Wilson Jeremiah Moses is a beast. Wilson J. Moses is incredible. Also, in some ways, a Europhile. And I think he's also very careful and nuanced because, see, this is what the enemies of African-centered thinking and work do. They go find the people with the most flawed arguments and use them as a proxy for everybody else. There's certain people they don't mess with. Let me quote Jeremiah Moses here on page 18. He says, in defense of Afrocentrism, it must be observed that the father of contemporary Afrocentrism, Sheikh Anta Diop, let me pause here and say this ordinal classification, father of this, mother of that, no, don't do that. Sheikh Anta Diop is an outsized influence. When Jacob Carruthers goes to see him in 1970, I think it was 4, where they went over, and Sheikh Anta Diop said, you got to study the Meta Neter, the Egyptian language. We're all studying Egyptian language in some ways because Sheikh Anta Diop told Jacob Carruthers to get back over there and learn that language, which he went over to the Kemet Institute with Rickety Wimby and Roosevelt Roberts and Yvonne Jones and others. And they began, Joseph Ben Levi, and all of whom have been to Kemet many times. They began to study that language. And we study the language now because there's a bridge that's been built. There's an intellectual genealogy. Most people critiquing Afrocentrism, if I wrote Afrocentrism and uniliterals on their forehead, they could not translate it. We can make you dance if you want. So before you open your mouth, start talking about hotel, yeah, okay. You don't even know what you're talking about. And now, because you don't know what you're talking about, you arguing with Ron DeSantis in, I started saying Andrew Gillum, because if he had just let them keep counting the votes, we might have even had to deal with this in the first place. But at any rate, you are dealing with Ron DeSantis because you don't know enough to fight back. The war in curriculum is about gaining enough of the momentum of memory to be able to displace this propaganda, this ideology that Charles Blow is talking about. We're coming there, about to come in for a landing. So he says that in his book, Civilization of Barbarism, Sheikh Anta Diop demonstrates a respect for the concept of cultural literacy. He is opposed to the vulgar type of Black culture that has been dominant since the Harlem Renaissance to the 1920s. Don't do that. Don't do that. Wilson Moses, maybe he didn't know that Sheikh Anta Diop, shortly before he made transition, came to the United States, came to the Nile Valley Conference in Atlanta in 1984, held by the study groups, many of whom stopped with many people who went to Kemet many times, the great Larry Obadeli Williams, of course, Asa Hilliard, Naeem Akbar, my man LeGrand Clegg, who was there, Charles Finch, who just wrote another book, Nile Valley Civilization. So maybe Wilson Moses didn't know how much Sheikh Anta Diop was in concert with the Africans of the diaspora, but I'll give him grace on that because, again, he's a beast of a scholar. And I know he's writing politically for a billionaire-funded outfit called the Manhattan Institute that's still creating chaos with Chris Rufo in 2023. Anyway, he says Diop is also suspicious of the sentimental Black cultural nationalism associated with Leopold Senghor and the French Negritude School. I'll give him a little bit more space there. Here's the point. Like the late African-American critic Sterling Brown, who we talked about many times, Diop condemns the treatment of Black folk as jazzy, exotic primitives and erotic barbarians. Afrocentrists resent the tendency to define Black culture in terms of primitivism grafted onto decadence. Diop's ardent followers are also opposed to the profane, scatological variety of Black ghetto culture that is associated with gangster rap, signifying monkeys, and playing the dozens, word games based on ritualized insult. The Afrocentrist dreams of appropriating the high culture of classical civilization and disdains the low culture of gangster rap. Although some may defend Two Live Crew on First Amendment grounds, few are sympathetic to the proposition that Two Live Crew represents Black culture. Most Black nationalists, including Black Muslims and Afrocentrists, insist to their credit that gangster rap must be understood as social pathology. Unfortunately, many of these same Black nationalists have undermined their credibility by their fundamentalist anti-intellectualism and their paranoid ravings about the Iceman inheritance, Jewish conspiracy, and melanin theory. My man, you are doing the most in that paragraph. Wilson Moses, as Dr. Obenga, the junior protege of Sheikh Anta Diop and our teacher of Meta Neter, along with Jacob Carruthers and the folks at the Kemetic Institute, would say, Dr. Obenga might say, you've mixed many things. But let's pull out a couple of things. One is the idea of high culture. People think y'all study in Kemet, but you don't study the working class people, the poor people, the people in Kemet, the people in Africa, the people in the diaspora. You want to go to the kind of high class culture, and you're not dealing with class. This is Clarence Walker's mixed-minded article in here called The Distortions of Afrocentric History. No, Let me say, first of all, that is absolutely true for some people. And that is not what we're doing. That is not what we're doing. What we have to do, and we're going to see this when we go to Set Ma'at, the place that is called Dir Medina in Arabic. Set Ma'at, the place of Ma'at. Place is one of the words they often use for villages or places. Set Ma'at, the place of Ma'at. This is the village where the people who worked on the tombs and temples lived. The people who drew and painted the Meta Nature, the people who carved out the places like Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, those places. And when we stand there and look at the simple way these folk lived, the way they enjoyed their lives, we go there specifically to grapple with the question of class. We don't know who could or couldn't write in Kemet. Because only the elite could write. I'm saying, you don't know that. You just make that assumption because you're from a society where everybody don't get a chance to go to school. You don't know nothing about it. And we can make you dance if we want. But do we want to put our energy in arguing with y'all, or do we want to put our energy in building through the momentum of memory, or rebuilding our governance formations that prior to the end of apartheid in the United States, we were very clear about the idea that everybody in this classroom going to at least know how to write legibly. Yeah, we're going to give out test scores and we're going to give out awards, but if you finish your work first, you go help somebody else. Lonnie Guinier is introducing that like that's a novel idea. It is novel to the Europeans because they got an individual Hunger Games-based, survivor-based achievement system in education, and they think, like Christopher Rufo, that the best thing you do is put everybody in it. Go! I'm chained, but I don't have. And then people say, oh, I don't want to do is take chains out. I don't want to do is take chains out. And then you come running into the curriculum somehow like your problem is not the curriculum construct and the ideology necessarily. Your problem is you ain't in it enough and you got a couple of words you arguing about. No, philosophically, you got to change the way of knowing. And what we are faced with things like alternatives to Afrocentrism is they know this is a problem because the people they're talking about ain't paying no attention to them. They're trying to reseize the control of power for people who are jailbreaking, who are escaping, and right or wrong. Because some of the stuff needs to be critiqued very deeply. But as Wilson Moses demonstrates, I ain't gonna jump on Sheikh on the joke. Why? Because y'all shouldn't jump on him because he gonna make you dance if you want. You gotta go find somebody like Mary Lefkowitz beats up on George G.M. James in here. They like beating up on George G.M. James, this kind of thing. You could beat up on George G.M. James. Why don't you try Theophilo Benga? Who? Yeah, you know who it is. You know who it is. But you can't talk about them. So you gotta pretend like they don't exist. But now too many people are working outside you. You gotta get some control on this. All right, coming in for a landing. The last section of this little pamphlet, which isn't even 100 pages, is 96 pages. What every student should know. And then they poll all these people, black and white. Kwame Appiah suggests you should know. They ask him one book, Things Fall Apart. Tony Brown says Sex and Race, J.A. Rogers. Tony Brown, now an elder, reaches back to somebody, the Jamaican writer, Joel Augustus Rogers, and breaks the paradigm. He picking somebody outside the university system who's writing about Africa from antiquity forward. This is a problem. Lynn Cheney, remember her? My Bondage and My Freedom. Frederick Douglass. Lynn Cheney, is that Dick Cheney's wife? Yeah. At the time, she was at the American Enterprise Institute. She says, I picked Frederick Douglass. They like that notion of the heroic individual. Principal Joe Clark. Mr. Clark? Yeah, Mr. Clark said, the content of our character shall be still. Again, that kind of austere, these people need to be brought in line. Joe Clark might say, a lot of that rap is pathology. Okay. Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates, The Souls of Black Folk. Really? Nathan Glazer, United States, the history of the Negro in the United States, E. Franklin Frazier, and From Slavery to Freedom, John Hope Franklin. I'm not going to read all these because there are a number of them, but I will make an interesting observation because Glenn Lowry in here, Andrew Hacker, Michael Myers, of course, Carol Mosley Braun, who suggests The Sneetches by Dr. Seuss. Senator Carol Mosley Braun. Wilson Moses suggests 3 books. The World in Africa by Du Bois, very good. 3 Negro Classics by John Hope Franklin, which is Up From Slavery. I forget what, Souls of Black Folk, and one other. I forget. I think My Bondage and My Freedom. But he suggests the Lerone Bennett, Before the Mayflower. Ooh, there's some line here. Before 1619? Okay, he's not alone. Who else suggested that? I like that what Diane Ravage said. She said the Dictionary of American Negro Biography. Somebody else. I'm not gonna go through it. Let me just look here. Juan Williams says Invisible Man. Yeah, no, I'm good. There was at least one other person that did. Frank Yerko, who was their favorite pet, who would try to say, I'm an Egyptologist and I'm saying there's a way to study Egypt, but you don't need to do what they doing because race, the Egyptians wouldn't have known race. We're not arguing over whether Egyptians would know race. We're not going over there looking for black as a racial construct. We're looking at the culture of African people. Don't dance. When we go in the Carr Museum and you see them human hair wigs that they shave their heads and then use the hair to create wigs because it's hot over there. They can take all their hair off and put their hair on, and their hair look like the hair on our heads. That solves that, Frank. Come on, Yurko. Carruthers wrote a whole pamphlet called Carruthers on Yurko. He could make you dance if you want, but he says the legacy of Egypt. Very interesting. But the reason I'm raising this because this same Manhattan Institute, where is one that Rufo works at now, they're still after it. Now, coming in for a landing, the AP course, Advanced Placement Course in African American Studies, tries to bridge the gap. The criticism of the AP course is, African American Studies course, is that Robin Kelly never made this criticism. They deal with ancient Africa, they deal with Africa, then they skip over Black Lives Matter and intersectionality and stuff. And they no, first of all, they don't do that. Second of all, Robin knows better than this. He's written about this as well. The reason we go to Kemet, the reason we talk about ancient Africa and tie it to the rest of the continent of Africa and then to the Africans who were taken out of the Africa is because it is a fluid, sometimes contradictory, but necessary reconnecting to understand how Africans have been in the world from the origin of humanity to now. We go there. This is what Asa Hayes is writing about in his essay, Why We Study Kemet, so we can ground ourselves in ways of knowing, in uses of science and technology, in cultural meaning making that allow us to reclaim the momentum of memory, something we have been doing, by the way, for a very long time. And the AP course tries to do that, but the challenge the AP course does is that it hasn't built the cultural momentum of memory. It's more chronological. So in other words, when you read something in the Florida standards that says instruction includes how slaves develop skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit, what is missing from that suggestion is the why, is the ways of knowing. This is the problem. The deep work is to be in conversation with ourselves to begin to draw out ways that African people have been in the world that compare to other ways other people have been in the world. We're going to see same stuff, similar stuff, and distinct stuff. We're more interested in the distinct stuff in the short term because it contributes to this larger humanity. But we have been blinded to the possibilities. So even when we think we're doing something that's going to enhance our people, like the AP African American Studies course, or fighting back against these Florida standards, we haven't yet consulted with ourselves deeply enough to bring out the why. So if the anger over the language in this curriculum is over the phrase personal benefit, and what has not remained unimagined is what we mean by personal benefit. And make no mistake about it, there are different ways to talk about personal benefit. There's no me without us. People say, oh, well, that's a semantic argument. Isn't all argument over curriculum semantics? Until it's not. Jailbreaking the university means withdrawing from this hierarchical process and inviting all of us into the conversation, because that is the source. So I'm going to finish with an article here. This is from the Compass, the Journal of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, ASCAC. These are in print, volume 3, issue 1. And we were very deliberate about putting these in print because we wanted a print version of these to go along with any electronic versions. Jacob Carruthers has a 60-page article in here, The Wahemi Mesu and Pan-African Historiography. It is a chapter in the larger work of the African World History Project that we have. And what he says in this article is very clear. And I'll end with this. There are 3 points. This is where the stakes are. This is why we go to the Nile Valley. This is why on Monday night in office hours, we'll go through the periodization of the Nile Valley and talk a little bit about the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, Old Kingdom, the classical foundational age, the Middle Kingdom, particularly Amenemhat, the Wahemi Mesu, which is why Carruthers names his article Wahemi Mesu, the repetition of the birth. When you find yourself in times of trouble as a society, you try to go back into your memory for the things that are good and bring that forward, informed as well by the things that have traumatized you and that you have suffered, so you don't make those same mistakes. When you're writing curriculum, the curriculum in the United States is anchored in the settler colonialism. So the founding, grounding assumption of any U.S. curriculum is displacement of the Aboriginals, which is never mentioned. Then you come forward with the assumption that the United States is a good thing. As Charles Blow would say, for the white Christians and nationalists, it is literally ordained by God. Manifest destiny. Schoolhouse Rock. We learned it as children. The traders, trappers, and the settlers, the politicians and the peddlers, they got there any way they could, because they coming west, and there were plenty of fights to win land rights, but the West was meant to be. It was manifest destiny. Gonna use your music to sell settler colonialism. And what's your argument with it? Not settler colonialism. Your argument with it, did you talk about the Buffalo Soldiers? What? Yeah. And okay, yeah, I want to talk about the indigenous people too. Okay, so yeah, they made Oppenheimer, and they didn't talk about the way that they displaced the Africans, Comanches, and the indigenous Comanches and them in Los Alamos. I mean, so let's add that. Want to talk about that? Okay, can we talk about the whole principle of creating the atomic bomb? Yeah, we want to talk about that too. Okay, can you bring in other cultural ways of knowing? Yeah, that's hard. Okay, can we just add some people to the curriculum? Can we talk about resistance today? The real resistance to this curriculum lies in the long view genealogy of our memory, not in just today fighting back. Jay Carruthers said there are 3 reasons that we focus on classical Africa and bring it forward through memory, the repetition of the birth. So it isn't just going to Kemet to talk about Old Kingdom when they create the foundation. Egypt is basically the culmination of thousands of years of African movement from the equator up to Egypt is the end of the process. So we're going to see the finished process of what Africans have been developing over tens of thousands of years in inner Africa. That's how we know it's African. We're not arguing about that. The Middle Kingdom after invasion is them tapping into that previous memory to restore themselves. Wahemi Mesu Amenemhat. We'll talk about that when we get to the Nile Valley. The so-called New Kingdom after another period of invasions is an attempt to reconnect as well through Amos, and then through Jehudimos, and then of course Hatshepsut, and then Amenhotep III, and so forth. Seti the First. Before that, I mean, but the point is this: there are real complicated lessons that we're going to be talking about in the Nile Valley. What happens when you expand so widely that you now do have some thugs running things? Because Ramses ain't that nice in a lot of ways. See, there's the standard philosophically in terms of ways of knowing, and then there's the reality. So class is a real issue. We're going to explore issues of class because the class issues in Kemet are still what we're dealing with today, and we have to deal with it. We have to be able to listen to that. We're not romanticizing. So a lot of people, this is not the thing that people like to punch us on. No, we're having a different conversation. And again, Carruthers has 3 things. He says we have the memory of African people before invaders. We go to Kemet to look at what was going on in Africa before invasion, before the Greeks, before Manetho. Even talking about old, middle, and new kingdom is to use a periodization that the Greeks elicit from Manetho, who was an Egyptian priest who's writing to help the Greeks understand, but it's putting that chronology in. The second thing we did, that's what allows us to see the living traditions when we see them. He says this restoring this and its equivalents in other African societies, we'll still see how we survive, how these things survive. So when people say instruction includes how slaves develop skills, people assume you learned them skills during slavery. And now I see Nicole Hannah-Jones and them, my friend Nicole Hannah-Jones, them saying, no, we brought skills with us. Our man, Howard French, saying that. They're absolutely right. But here's the real thing as it hits. You think the momentum of memory is real tough when you bring the Mandé blacksmiths in or the women agriculturalists of what is now Sierra Leone and Liberia in. You think it's real tough when you bring the architects of Central Africa in. How tough will it be when you go back thousands of years before that and bring the whole continent in, beginning with the Nile Valley? You're talking about wash over this thing? Oh, we can make you dance if you want. Drew Santis, you're giving a talk in a building that we developed the formation for creating walls and a roof. We're going to stand at Saqqara at the oldest stone building. Bruh, you in here talking smack against black people in a building. You're surrounded by architecture we literally gave you, in addition to your fingers and toes and your mouth, because we your grandparents. But we'll get to that in another point. The second of the 3 says the African impact on the origins and developments of Eurasian historiographies and the counter impact of Eurasian historiographies on Africa. This is the challenge. If Africa is the export of the Abrahamic traditions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, is Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and it is, then what distinguishes white Christian nationalism from the ways of knowing that left Africa and that the Romans adopted as Christianity. Well, here's the challenge, and here's where it gets difficult, because one of the sisters on the board, one of the black women said, you know, I'm glad we got taken from Africa, because if they hadn't, we'd be worshiping a tree. Okay, hold on. This is gonna be problematic, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it. This is a when Charles T. Washington and says, you got, because they can quote Booker T. Washington. We must acknowledge that notwithstanding the of slavery, the 10 million Negroes inhabiting this country, who themselves or whose ancestors went through the school of slavery, longer and more hopeful condition, morally and religiously, than is true of an equal number of black other portion of the globe. And they say, see, and they say, when you look at the AP course and you look at the Florida standards, they use some of the very similar language on skill development and use for benefit, which is true. Now you got a problem. Why is that a problem? Well, here's the issue. And stay with me. This is going to be difficult. For a lot of people in the Christian worldview, it's about soul salvation, which means individual salvation. I don't care if my mama don't go. I don't care if my daddy don't go. That individual-based negotiation with some force notion of the divine for your personal eternal benefit, that is part of the number two, what Carruthers was talking about, the counter impact of Eurasian historiographies on Africa. And that is something that goes greatly unvoiced because it fits well with capitalism. I'm going to get rich, and if I want you to eat something, I'll give you some money, but I'm going to get rich first because I can't help you till I'm rich. I'm going to heaven. You can go to hell. I'm going to expose you. That's my job. But if you don't do it, you're a heathen. Oh, what the hell just happened? Conversion? This is what Dr. Carruthers calls the metaphysics of alienation. You've alienated yourself. And what we have, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, some of these things that we claim we're rejecting, we also embrace more deeply as a result of this cultural infiltration. The third of the three. He says the rise of Pan-African liberation historiography from David Walker to Sheikh Anta Job, anticipating the African Renaissance over 50 years ago. What Carruthers is saying in conclusion is that the work we have to do is work we've been trying to do for well over a century. Us going to Kemet is following in a tradition of Africans that extends back to the 19th century. Why are we going? We're going to get a grounding. We're going to be exposed. We're going to literally sit in the breadcrumb factory. And having done that, the more we study, the more we talk with each other, the more we develop, the more we can reclaim the momentum of memory. And then we don't argue over words in a curriculum. We don't argue over whether or not enough Black people were included here in a no, we are standing in our space. And you know how it's effective? There are two ways we know. We know it's effective because we see the transformational impact in ourselves, and we're going to all experience that when we go to the Nile Valley. It never gets old. And the second reason we know, which is a much more diminished reason, but important nonetheless, is that when we start doing that, that's when you see the open enemies of our common humanity lose their minds because we're no longer enslaved. And we have developed using our skills and talents for our personal, meaning collective benefit.
Yes. Was that? Are you still here?
Yeah.
All right.
I know it was long, but yeah, they did remove the woman and gave us a Holy Ghost. That was the Nicaea Council. Wait, you there?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, it's done. I'm sorry, we went a little long.
I'm not worried about that. I just want you guys to have a safe trip. I want everyone who's going to be transformed by the. There's like a feedback or something.
It is. Maybe if I mute myself, it'll.
No, it's probably me. I've been having oh yeah, that did work. I've been having technical difficulties. But before we go, I remember when you had that shirt the first time I saw it. Can you just, again, for those who are uninformed with MetaNature, can you just tell them what that says?
Sure, we can see. All right, you know what? We're in Nubia. Let's just see if somebody very quickly can translate this. Let me stand up a little. Let me move this up a little bit to see. All right. Can y'all see what that is? Somebody translate it right quick. I'm going to scroll the chat. And if they can't do it quickly, these are all uniliterals, right? This is all uniliterals. What's the first one? Now, anybody who's watching this later on YouTube or seeing on other platforms, and shout out to Ahmad, I figured y'all done jailbroke the Twitter now, or X or whatever they call it. People are watching all over. This is very important. Everybody getting exposed. We about to see something. Let me go here to new chats. Let me scroll. I'm scrolling, trying to scroll. We may not be able to do it quickly. There's probably somebody in here. Okay. Somebody got the first one, K. That's right. That's the unilateral K, right? This is the unilateral, the flowering reed, I. This is the owl, M. Owl is seen also as a figure of wisdom of sorts, but M, well, there are a lot of other grammatical rules, but K-I-M. The other thing is they're not vowels in Meta Nature, so this would be a soft vowel like an I. Kim. Then the Egyptian vulture, which is a soft vowel. There you go. Angela got it. I mean, Shanita got it. That's right. There, she said it. Kim. This is the bread loaf. The cake. Then this, you can't really see it closely. I put it up on the. This is the an H, almost like a an enclosure for it, like. But they sewed it in without making. You can't see how it traces here, almost like a maze. Almost like a maze. You can't see the lines here. Come on. Then here is the double slash, which can also be the double flowering reed, depending on what you see. So this is E. So together it's K, I, T, E. Kimati. They got it. Lamar got it. Come on. That's my Gikuyu name that Kwesi Nelson, a Yoruba priestess, gave me at Kwanzaa in Nashville in December 1987. The great Kwame Leo Lillard, for many years now, an ancestor who convened the Kwanzaas in Nashville from the time we were kids through now. Then Umar Jate, the great Umar Jate, who did it for many years, he and his family. And now they continue. So people talking about Kwanzaa like, oh, it's like Juneteenth. Well, nobody knew about Juneteenth. Come on now. Everybody knew about a lot of things that you don't know if you don't know about no governance. But she gave me that name. It was not a name I picked for myself. It is a Gikuyu name. So Baba Adesoje may know, I know, and Duke Wyndham would know, and Kiswahili. Not Kiswahili. Well, Kiswahili too, but in East Africa, you would know that name means searcher, provider. So she said, there's an elder who had been watching me for a long time. Earnest provider. That's right, Kemet.
Well, I knew it. So
you knew it. That's right. And it's the Meta Nature. Right.
Yes, I want to wish everyone a safe journey. We're going to, of course, talk in office hours, and then you guys are going to be off. But for people who are traveling there, who may not be going with the group of 200, what advice can you give them in terms of what they should be taking with them, or in terms of like how they should be approaching the journey to Kemet, or to the continent?
Absolutely. Very quickly, because there are people who go in ones and twos. Be careful. Always head on a swivel. The guides there are professional guides, meaning they're employed by the private tour companies, but all of them have to register with the government. They're in uneven quality. Most of the guys don't know much Meta Nature, though they have to go through a kind of formal schooling, but it's kind of quick. So bring a good book or two. So you can do, if you go to the Egyptian Museum, stop there and get you a nice text. There are plenty of books around that can help you kind of do a little lightweight studying on your own as you're going. If you're going to Luxor, you definitely, or Aswan, you want to go by Abuti's bookstore. Our brother Abuti, who is there. When you go to Cairo, there's a Nubian brother who has a bookstore in the alley there that leads to the place they're going to take you. One of the Coptic churches is very popular on tour. Don't pass by that stall. He has some great books there. You can pick up some things. And then finally, all of the advice that you said before, Prof, you got to stay hydrated. It's going to be well over 100 degrees consistently. We'll make the adjustments. If you feel like you're lightheaded or whatever, sit down. Get you some water quickly. In terms of food, Mario has a very sensitive stomach, and mine has gotten sensitive over the years. People say brush your teeth with bottled water and all that. I would agree, if you know what I mean. Careful about, drinking local stuff. My stomach was okay. When I went there in 96, we were in Aswan. I went over Elephantine Island. I'm sitting in the room with all these Nubian cats. We were around there talking about politics. We talking about George Bush at the time, which is crazy. They came looking for me, and by then I had drunk about half a pot of and Sunyata will get a kick out of this. They call it karkade in Kemet, but we call it hibiscus or sorrel, except it was hot. So they, boy, you drinking that tea or is it, you know, that water gonna send you to the run? I ain't had no problems with it. But other thing is, if you have stomach problems, and it can happen because even if you eat the fruit got water in it. Get the local medicine, because you know the local stuff that deals with diarrhea and gas, that kind of thing, it's gonna work better on your stomach than putting some stuff from the U.S. You know, have some stuff from the U.S. if you have to, but get the local stuff because it's gonna work better on the local food. Don't You can use your make sure your bank knows before you leave that you're traveling, so they don't put no stop on you because they see a charge somewhere. And they have ATMs all over. Like I said, head on a swivel, but at the same time, you can get money out the ATM. So there's no need to try to take a whole bunch of dollar bills or cash money from here, there. No. And yeah, keep your passport on you and safe.
Yes, your passport, super important. Dr. Carr, I appreciate you so much.
I appreciate you too.
I cannot wait to see you in person again. And
yeah, soon.
Yes, and all of the Nubians and others, have a wonderful weekend.
Yes. Oh, I should mention, I see here Kim makes a point, be reserved to men. They don't understand boundaries well, it seems. Yeah, remember, we are in a Muslim country. So as we tell people, when we go in the mosque, they let anybody go. But I'm telling you, what'd you say, Prof? Home training. We got home training. We've been in there, particularly with young people. They may have on some shorts because it's hot outside, but they will bring a scarf or something tied around, or a sweater around their waist. And then when they go in, they kind of just lower it or whatever, because we going into a Christian mosque or a Muslim mosque or a Christian eating space. But then you walk past and I won't name the countries people come from, but you can imagine who come in damn near naked because they ain't even thought about that. Because again, this idea that I can just be who I am everywhere. Just be mindful of the protocols.
Right. Head coverings, ladies.
There you go. No question.
All right, Dr. Carr, see you in office hours on Monday, and everyone else, I'll see tomorrow. Maroon's Medicine Chest. Those of you in Nubia.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Love you.
Sister. Love you. Yeah.
All right.